In the suffocating confines of a dimly lit interrogation room, the air crackled with hostility as a cup of scalding coffee arched through the space, splashing across Maya Bennett's face. The steam rose in swirling tendrils, blending with the thick tension that hung like a storm cloud. Her skin flared an angry red, the heat searing into her flesh, yet her eyes dark, resolute, and unyielding remained fixed on Victor Hayes. The towering police officer loomed over her, his broad shoulders casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the room. His lips curled into a sneer, his voice oozing with unchecked arrogance as he spat. "You really think you can stroll in here and lecture me on how to do my job?" That single, vicious act wasn't just a fleeting burst of temper, it was a blazing emblem of power abused, of racism laid bare, and of a system that had long shielded men like Hayes from the consequences of their cruelty. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have suspected, was that Maya had anticipated this moment. Tucked discreetly in her pocket, a small recording device hummed quietly, capturing every venomous word, every threat, and the unmistakable sound of that coffee hitting her skin. This wasn't just one woman's quest for justice, it was the opening salvo in a relentless crusade to unveil the truth, to topple a culture of impunity that had festered far too long. Maya, a black woman forged in determination, stood not only for herself but for her entire community. Her fight a clarion call to dismantle the machinery that propped up men like Hayes. That cup of coffee didn't just burn hair, it ignited a wildfire, one destined to illuminate the shadows of injustice, galvanize a movement, and lay bare the raw courage required to demand lasting change. The precinct buzzed with its usual restless energy that morning, a symphony of ringing phones, rustling papers, and the occasional ripple of laughter bouncing off the drab gray walls. It was another ordinary day, or so it appeared, until the front doors swung open with a quiet creak, and Maya Bennett stepped inside. She wore a sharp, dark blazer that hugged her frame, her posture radiating a quiet authority that belied the storm brewing within her. Her natural curls framed a face that bore no trace of fear, no flicker of hesitation, only a steely resolve that seemed to hum beneath her calm exterior. As she approached the front desk, the officer stationed there, a weary man with tired eyes named Tom, looked up, startled by the sudden shift in the room's rhythm. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped but curious, his pen hovering over a half-filled form. Maya's voice cut through the hum of the precinct, steady and firm. "Yes, I need to file a complaint. It's about an incident involving officers from this precinct." Tom blinked, caught off guard. Formal complaints weren't a daily occurrence, and the weight in Maya's words hinted at something deeper, something that wouldn't be brushed aside with a quick apology or a dismissive wave. He hesitated, his gaze darting toward Victor Hayes, who lounged at a nearby desk. His thick frame sprawled in a chair as he sipped coffee from a chipped mug. Victor, a man who wore his no-nonsense reputation like a badge of honor, caught the exchange out of the corner of his eye. He muttered to his younger colleague, Ethan Wells, who sat hunched over a report. "She doesn't look like trouble, but you never know with these types." Ethan shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing as he whispered back, "She's here about police stops in her neighborhood, something about her nephew being detained." Victor snorted, draining his coffee in one gulp. "Oh, fantastic." Another bleeding heart whining that we're not coddling them enough. His heavy boots thudded against the worn linoleum as he rose, swaggering toward the front desk, the mug landing on the counter with a sharp clink that reverberated through the room. "What's the problem here?" Victor demanded, his voice booming as he planted himself in front of Maya. She turned to face him, her expression a mask of unshakable calm. "I'm here to report an unjustified detention," she said, her words deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of her conviction. "My nephew was stopped last week. Now reason. No cause. This isn't a one-off, it's a pattern, targeting our community. I've got documentation to back it up." She slid a tidy stack of papers across the counter, the edges crisp and orderly, a silent testament to the hours she'd spent compiling evidence. Victor didn't spare the papers a glance. Instead, he leaned in closer, his smirk widening, his breath faintly sour with coffee. "We get a lot of complaints around here, sweetheart. Most of 'em are hot air. What makes you think yours is worth my time?" Maya's gaze didn't falter, her eyes boring into his with an intensity that made the air between them crackle, because I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't. Her voice was a blade, sharp and unyielding, slicing through his smugness. For a fleeting moment, Victor's grin faltered, but he quickly masked it with a deeper sneer. "Fine," he drawled, straightening up and motioning toward the back. "Let's take this somewhere private." The smirk crept back onto his face as he turned, leading her down a narrow hallway, his strides long and purposeful, as if daring her to keep up. The interrogation room was a stark, sterile box bare walls, a flickering fluorescent light overhead, and a metal table bolted to the floor. The door slammed shut behind them with a hollow bang, the sound lingering like a warning. Victor gestured toward the lone chair at the table's center, his tone curt. "Sit." Maya complied, her movements slow and deliberate, her hands resting lightly on the table as she settled in. Victor dragged the chair opposite her across the floor with a grating screech, then flopped into it, leaning back and crossing his arms over his chest. "All right," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's hear it. What's your big sob story?" Maya's composure didn't waver, her fingers brushing the edge of her neatly folded hands as she spoke. "As I said, my nephew was detained without cause. He wasn't breaking any laws, wasn't a threat. This isn't isolated, it's been happening over and over in our neighborhood. I've got evidence here of other cases, a clear pattern of profiling." She nodded toward the papers she'd carried in, now resting on the table between them. Victor let out a harsh chuckle, shaking his head as if she'd told a bad joke. "Profiling? You think you've uncovered some grand conspiracy? Huh, listen, lady, we're just doing our jobs. If your nephew got stopped, there was a reason." "There wasn't," Maya shot back, her voice steady but edged with steel. Victor's fingers tightened around his coffee mug, the steam still curling faintly from the half-full cup. He tilted it slightly, peering at her over the rim, his tone turning venomous. "People like you always think you can waltz in here and tell us how to run things. You think you're smarter than us, that you could do my job better than me." Maya met his stare, unflinching. "I think you have a duty to treat everyone in this community with fairness and respect." The word respect seemed to ignite something in Victor. His smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl that twisted his features into something feral. He leaned forward, the mug trembling in his grip. "Respect," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You want to lecture me about respect?" Without warning, he jerked the mug forward, sending a wave of scalding coffee crashing across Maya's face. The liquid hit her like a slap, the heat sinking into her skin with a vicious sting that made her gasp a sharp, involuntary sound that broke the room's silence. Her body stiffened, her fists clenching against the table as the pain roared through her. But she didn't scream, didn't flinch away. Victor rose to his full height, towering over her, the empty mug dangling from his hand as he grinned at a predator savoring a kill. "Still think you're calling the shots here?" he taunted, his voice thick with triumph. Maya's breathing came in heavy, controlled bursts as she lifted her head, the raw burn pulsing across her cheeks. Her face was a map of pain, red and glistening, but her ice-toast fierce, unbreakable ice lock onto his with a fire that made his bravado flicker. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low, steady, and laced with a quiet certainty that sent a shiver through the room. Victor hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in, but he quickly brushed it off with a forced laugh. "Regret what? Nobody's gonna believe you. Nobody cares about people like you." He turned on his heel, striding out and slamming the door behind him, the clang echoing like a gunshot. Alone in the room, Maya sat still, the pain throbbing in waves across her face. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached into her pocket, pulling out the small recorder she'd hidden there. She pressed the stop button, the tiny red light blinking off as the device fell silent. Every word, every threat, every drop of that coffee, it was all there, preserved in cold, undeniable clarity. Victor didn't know it yet, but he'd just handed her the weapon she needed to bring him down. That coffee hadn't just scalded Harriet, had sealed his fate, a spark that would grow into a blaze of reckoning. Back at his desk, Victor slumped into his chair, a smug grin plastered across his face as he grabbed his phone and scrolled idly, as if the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. The precinct hummed around Himfisser's typing, phones ringing, the usual chaos of the day unfolding. But Ethan Wells, perched at the desk nearby, couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. He'd caught glimpses of the confrontation through the hallway window of coffee, the tension, the way Maya hadn't buckled. "What did you even bring her back there for?" he asked finally, his voice cautious, almost reluctant. Victor glanced up, his smirk widening. "Had to show her who's in charge. People like her need to be reminded where they stand." He raised his voice slightly, loud enough for the officers nearby to overhear, basking in their nods of approval. Ethan frowned, his fingers tapping nervously against his desk. She didn't seem like she was stirring up trouble. She had paperwork. She was calm. Victor cut him off with a bark of laughter. "Calm? You think that makes her special? She waltzes in here acting like she owns the place. And I'm supposed to just nod and smile. Don't be so naive, Wells. They all think they can outsmart us, tell us how to do our jobs." Ethan fell silent, his jaw tightening. He knew better than to push Victor when he was like Thisha's temper was a storm best avoided. But deep down, he couldn't shake the image of Maya's steady gaze, the quiet strength that lingered even as Victor raged. Something about her felt different, like a force he couldn't quite place. Meanwhile, a block away, Maya sat in her car, the engine idling softly as the burn on her face pulsed with every heartbeat. The pain was a constant, sharp reminder of what had just happened, but it barely registered against the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Her fingers brushed the recorder in her lap, its weight grounding her as she replayed the encounter, not the sting of the coffee, but the smug tilt of Victor's head, the arrogance in his voice, the way he'd assumed she'd break. He was wrong. This wasn't about one moment of cruelty, it was about a system that let men like him thrive. A system that turned a blind eye to the pain it inflicted. Justice wasn't just about holding Victor accountable. It was about exposing the rot he represented. The consequences of power wielded without restraint. That lesson burned brighter than the coffee ever could. And as Maya stared out at the precinct in the distance, she knew this was only the beginning. The fight ahead would be long, brutal, and unforgiving, but she was ready. The recorder tucked snugly in Maya Bennett's pocket hummed silently, capturing every sound with ruthless precision. Victor Hayes's venomous insults sliced through the air like a blade, each word dripping with contempt as he hurled them at her. Then came the sharp splash of Kafiyet, bitter and deliberate, testing her crisp blouse and searing her skin. Through it all, Maya's voice remained steady, a calm anchor in the storm of his aggression. She wasn't just recording an outburst. She was gathering evidence of something far bigger than one man's temper. This wasn't personal, though the sting of the coffee and the bite of his words made it feel that way. It was about a festering sickness, a culture of arrogance and unchecked power that had taken root in the precinct, strangling justice beneath its weight. As she sat in her car afterward, Maya caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her dark eyes burned with a fierce determination, though shadows of exhaustion and hurt lingered beneath them. Her jaw clenched as she traced the faint red mark the coffee had left on her cheek. This fight was bigger than her bruised pride. It was about carving a path for accountability, about proving that no one, not even those shielded by a badge, could escape the consequences of their actions. Her phone buzzed insistently on the passenger seat, jolting her from her thoughts. The name Mitchell Grant glowed on the screen. Captain of the precinct, a man whose clipped tone and guarded demeanor she knew all too well. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the answer button, feeling the weight of what she was about to set in motion. Finally, she pressed it to her ear. "Bennett," Grant's voice crackled through, tight and formal. "I heard you stopped by the precinct today. Everything okay?" "I need to see you," Maya replied, her voice unwavering despite the storm brewing inside her. "It's urgent." Grant paused, the silence heavy with unspoken questions. "You're not calling me as Chief Bennett, are you?" "No," she said, her tone softening but still edged with steel. "Right now, I'm just a concerned citizen who's had enough." Back inside the precinct, Victor Hayes basked in the glow of his own bravado. A small crowd of officers had gathered around him, their eyes wide with amusement as he recounted his version of the encounter. "So she waltzes in here," he said, his hands waving theatrically, clutching her little stack of papers like some big-shot lawyer. "Claims we're profiling her nephew. Can you believe the nerve?" His voice rose, feeding off the chuckles rippling through the group. Told her where she could shove those papers, too. He grinned, raising his empty coffee mug in a mock toast. Guts and a good coffee mug, that's me. The laughter swelled, a chorus of approval that fueled his ego. But not everyone joined in. Ethan Wells sat at his cluttered desk a few feet away, his stomach twisting into a tight knot. He'd heard Victor's stories before, tales of petty power plays, of cutting corners, of pushing people just because he could. 2 years in this precinct had taught Ethan to tune out the noise, but this time felt different. The air carried a sour tang of wrongness he couldn't shake. Victor's swagger, usually a source of crude entertainment, now seemed reckless, teetering on the edge of something dangerous. When Victor finally strutted off to refill his mug, Ethan leaned toward Lily Martinez, a rookie who'd only been on the force a few months. Her desk was a neat island of order amid the chaos, her pen tapping nervously against a notepad. "Did you see her?" Ethan asked, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "The woman Victor was going on about?" Lily glanced up, her brow furrowing slightly. "Yeah, I saw her. What about it?" "What did you think?" he pressed, searching her face for a flicker of the unease he felt. She shrugged, her dark ponytail swaying with the motion. "She didn't strike me as some random troublemaker. She had this confidence, you know, like she'd done her homework and wasn't afraid to show it." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the interrogation room where Maya had stood her ground. "Yeah, something's off about this whole thing. I can feel it." That evening, Captain Mitchell Grant slumped behind his desk, the faint glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across his weathered face. His brow creased as Maya recounted the incident, her words painting a vivid picture of Victor's aggression. "He threw hot coffee on you." Grant's voice was a low rumble, tinged with disbelief and a flicker of anger. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled as if to hold back the weight of what he was hearing. Maya nodded, her expression unyielding. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the recorder, and set it down between them with a soft thud. "It's all here," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Every word, every sound." Grant exhaled heavily, running a hand across the back of his neck. "This is bad, Bennett. Really bad." "I know," she shot back, her tone sharp but measured. "But this isn't just about Victor Hayes. Mitchell, you and I both know that. This precinct's got a rot running through it: arrogance, favoritism, a boys' club that thinks the rules don't apply. Hayes is just the loudest symptom." Grant leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His frown deepened, etching lines into his forehead. "I can't bury this, Maya, but you've got to see how messy this'll get. Hayes has been here forever. People like him, they've got his back." She arched an eyebrow, her gaze piercing. "So what's your plan? Hope it fades away." "Let me remind you, I'm not just some bystander with a grudge. I'm your superior, and I've seen the complaints stacking up: ignored, dismissed, buried. If you don't handle this right, it's not just Hayes who'll pay the price. It'll be you, too." Their eyes locked, a silent battle of wills stretching across the desk. Finally, Grant sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "What do you want me to do?" "Start an internal review," Maya said firmly. "Bring in an outside investigator if you have to. Make it crystal clear this kind of behavior's done here. And Hayes, suspend him, now." Grant nodded, slow and deliberate. "All right, I'll get it rolling. But Hayes won't go quiet, lie. He's a fighter." "Good," Maya replied, a faint, steely smile tugging at her lips. "I'm counting on it." By the next morning, the precinct buzzed with a new, uneasy energy. A memo had gone out short, stark, and impossible to ignore. An internal review was underway, targeting professional conduct and community relations. To most officers, it was just another layer of bureaucratic drudgery, a formality to slog through. But for Victor Hayes, it hit like a sledgehammer. He sat at his desk, the memo clutched in his hand, his knuckles whitening as he read it again. The words "immediate action required" seemed to pulse on the page, a silent accusation aimed straight at him, round him. The room hummed with muted murmurs and sidelong glances. The usual crowd of admirers had thinned, their laughter replaced by an awkward distance. "Don't sweat it," Alan Cooper, the union rep, said, clapping a heavy hand on Victor's shoulder. Alan was a broad man with a voice that carried. his graying hair and easy grin masking a shrewd loyalty to the old guard. "These reviews come and go. Keep your head down, and it'll blow over." Victor forced a laugh, but it came out brittle, tinged with a creeping dread he couldn't name. "Yeah, just more paper-pushing nonsense, right?" he said, loud enough for the room to hear. No one answered. The silence pressed against him, thick and suffocating. As the day wore on, the precinct's familiar rhythm faltered. Officers moved with a cautious stiffness, their usual banter replaced by clipped exchanges and stolen looks. Ethan Wells hunched over his computer, his fingers flying across the keys as he buried himself in busy work, avoiding Victor's gaze. Lily Martinez sat nearby, flipping through her notes with a quiet intensity, her lips pressed into a thin line. Even the officers who had once egged Victor on now kept their distance, their eyes flickering with something like doubt or fear. Victor felt it, to the walls inching closer, the air growing heavier. He leaned back in his chair, forcing a smirk. "What, they think the world's ending over some stupid memo," he muttered, his voice carrying a bravado he didn't feel. The room stayed silent, the absence of response louder than any rebuke. Meanwhile, downtown in her office, Maya Bennett was a whirlwind of purpose. The internal review was just the opening move in a chess game she intended to win. She sat at her desk, her laptop open, fingers dancing across the keys as she drafted an official report. Attached were the damning recordings from her clash with Victor, alongside a stack of prior complaint signed cries for help from a community fed up with the precinct's heavy hand. The pattern was undeniable. Victor wasn't a lone bad apple. He was a product of a system that thrived on silence, rewarding loyalty over integrity. Justice, she knew, wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about dismantling the structures that enabled them. Her phone buzzed again, Mitchell Grant's name flashing on the screen. "Bennett," he said, his voice measured but strained. "The memo's out. The department's already buzzing." "Good," she replied, leaning back in her chair. "The more attention, the harder it is to bury." Grant hesitated. "Victor's not happy. He's talking about a union grievance. Alan Cooper's already circling." "Of course he is," Maya said, her voice cool and unflinching. "That's what men like Victor Dodeflicht, dig in, play the victim. Let him try. We've got the proof." "It's gonna get ugly," Grant warned, his tone dropping. "He's got loyalists here, years of history. This could split the precinct wide open." "Then it splits," she said, her words cutting through his doubt. "Better a fracture now than letting this poison fester. They need to see there's a line and no exceptions." By mid-afternoon, Victor's frustration had boiled over into something raw and jagged. He cornered Ethan Wells near the break room, the faint scent of stale coffee hanging in the air. "You're awfully quiet today," Victor said, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Got something to say?" Ethan tensed, his grip tightening on his chipped coffee mug. "No," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just got work to do." "Work to do," Victor echoed, his tone dripping with mockery. He stepped closer, his shadow looming over Ethan. "You buying into this review crap? You know how it goes to me in wines, and we all pay the price." Ethan's jaw tightened, a flicker of defiance sparking in his chest. He wanted to push back, to tell Victor that maybe the whining wasn't the problem, maybe it was the coffee throwing, the bullying, the swaggering entitlement. But Victor's presence was a wall, pressing down on him until the words died in his throat. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice shaky but firm. "Maybe it's time we took a hard look how things run here." Victor's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, dangerous glint. He leaned in, his voice a low hiss. "Careful, Wells. You don't want to end up on the wrong side of this." Ethan nodded quickly and slipped away. But Victor's threat hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. The tension didn't stay confined to the precinct's walls, it spilled outward, rippling through the community like a stone dropped in still water. Word of the review reached local activists, their voices rising in a chorus that had been stifled too long. That evening, Maya stood in a packed church basement, the air thick with the scent of old wood and quiet hope. Residents filled the rows, their faces etched with frustration and cautious optimism. A woman in the front stood, her hands trembling as she held up a faded photograph of a teenage boy with a shy smile. "This is my son," she said, her voice cracking like dry earth. "Last year, officers from that precinct stopped him 3 times, searched him, harassed him for nothing. He's a good kid, but now he's scared to leave the house. How's that justice?" Maya met her gaze, her own expression a blend of empathy and resolve. "I hear you," she said, her voice steady and clear. "And I promise this review isn't just paperwork. It's the first step to tearing down the walls that protect people like Victor Hayes. It's about consequences, about making sure power doesn't mean impunity." The room stirred, a murmur of agreement swelling into a quiet roar. Maya felt the weight of their trust settle on her shoulders. A reminder that this fight wasn't just about one precinct or one officer, it was about a lesson. As old as time, unchecked power corrupts, and justice demands a reckoning. For Victor, for the precinct, for everyone watching. The consequences were coming, and no amount of bravado could stop them now. The air in the community meeting hall hung heavy with skepticism as Back raised his hand, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "How can we be sure this won't just vanish into thin air like every other promise we've heard?" His eyes, sharp and weary from years of disappointment, locked onto Maya Bennett, the woman standing at the front of the room. She didn't flinch. Instead, she let the weight of his question settle, her lips tightening as she considered the countless times this community had been let down. "I can't erase the past," she admitted, her voice steady but laced with a quiet fire. "And I won't pretend trust is something I can demand from you right now. But hear the seam, not here to shuffle papers, play favorites, or shield anyone who doesn't deserve it. This isn't about one bad apple. It's about uprooting a system that's been rotting for too long." Her words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the crowd. A few hands clapped hesitantly, the sound cautious yet hopeful. Like the first drops of rain after a drought, Maya felt the weight of their guarded optimism pressing against her chest, knowing full well that trust was a fragile thread, one she'd have to weave stitch by painstaking stitch. Miles away, at the precinct, Victor Hayes stormed into the dimly lit conference room where Alan Cooper, the union rep, waited. The flickering fluorescent light overhead cast jagged shadows across Victor's face as he paced, his boots thudding against the worn linoleum. "This is insane," he spat, his voice tight with indignation. "They're treating me like some thuggle over a damn cup of coffee." Cooper, slouched in his chair with the calm of a man who'd seen this dance before, arched an eyebrow. "A cup of coffee you flung in someone's face," he said dryly, his tone carrying just enough edge to make Victor bristle. Victor waved a hand, brushing off the accusation as if it were a fly buzzing too close. "She provoked me, practically begged for it. Besides, who cares about some nobody whining to HR? They'll move on in a week, tops." He stopped pacing, expecting Cooper to nod in agreement. But the older man leaned back instead, crossing his arms over his chest. "That nobody isn't who you think," Cooper said, his voice low, deliberate. Victor froze mid-step, his smirk faltering. "What's that supposed to mean?" he demanded. But a flicker of unease was already creeping into his gut. Cooper paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make Victor squirm. Then dropped the bomb. "Her name's Maya Bennett. She's not some random do-gooder. She's the new chief of police." The words hit Victor like a punch to the throat. His knees buckled slightly as the blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. "You're messing with me," he croaked, but Cooper's grim expression said otherwise. "Got the confirmation this morning," Cooper continued, tapping his fingers on the table. "She went undercover to sniff out this precinct, and guess who's now the star of her show?" Victor sank into a chair, his bravado collapsing like a house of cards in a storm. His mind raced, replaying every moment of that encounter, coffee splashing, her unflinching stare, the way she'd walked away without a word. "How did I miss this?" he muttered, more to himself than to Cooper, who merely shrugged. "Doesn't matter how. What matters is what's next. If this blows up and it will, you're not just looking at a pink slip. Assault charges could be on the table, for the first time in years." Victor felt a cold tendril of fear coil around his spine, tightening with every breath. Later that night, Maya dragged herself into her office, the weight of the day clinging to her like damp clothes. The precinct's fluorescent halls had long faded into darkness, leaving only the soft hum of her desk lamp to keep her company. She'd spent hours with community leaders, their voices a mix of hope and exhaustion as they recounted years of ignored pleas. She'd pored over stacks of complaints, each one a testament to a broken system, and huddled with investigators plotting the next steps. Now, alone at her desk, she opened the file marked Victor Hayes Incident Report. The pages spilled out like a grim novel, excessive force, venomous words hurled like weapons, stops with no cause but spite. Each entry painted a vivid portrait of a culture festering in arrogance and unchecked power. She traced a finger over the dates, some stretching back years, and felt a surge of anger mingled with resolve. This wasn't just about Victor. It was about every officer who'd thrived under the same warped rules. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. A text from Captain Grant glowed on the screen. "Hayes knows who you are. Brace yourself." A faint smile tugged at her lips. She'd been bracing herself since the day she took this job. The real fight, the one to dismantle the machinery that propped up men like Victor, was just beginning, and she was ready to swing. The precinct itself had become a simmering cauldron, the air thick with tension you could slice with a dull blade. For years, an unwritten code had held sway, loyalty above all, secrets buried deep, and whatever happened in the shadows stayed there. But now, with Maya Bennett's internal review cracking the foundation, that pact was splintering. Whispers slithered through the hallways like restless ghosts whose name would surface next. Would the investigation stop at Victor, or would it drag others into the light? For some, the fear of exposure was a noose tightening around their necks. For others, it was a long overdue reckoning. Ethan Wells sat at his desk, staring at an email from the department brass. The subject line, "Call for witness statements regarding professional conduct," burned into his retinas. Below it, a polite but firm nudge. Officers were expected to spill the truth about any incidents under scrutiny. His stomach churned as he glanced around the bullpen. Across the room, Victor held court with his usual crew, his laughter booming like thunder. Though it lacked its old swagger, the others at the table joined in, their chuckles too loud, too forced, their eyes darting like cornered animals. "Wells," Victor's voice cut through the noise, waving him over with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Ethan stiffened, feeling the room's attention shift to him like a spotlight. He stood, forcing his legs to move, his face a mask of calm despite the storm roiling inside. "What's up?" he asked, his voice steady even as his pulse hammered. Victor's smirk was icy. "You've been quiet lately. Something eating at you?" Ethan shook his head, quick and curt. "Nope. Just keeping up with all this review crap." Victor clapped him on the shoulder, the gesture heavy with unspoken warning. "That's the spirit. You know how it works, it's all theater. They need a fall guy to keep the suits happy. Let him try." Ethan nodded, mute, but the truth gnawed at him. How long could he keep his mouth shut? Down the hall, Lily Martinez hunched over her patrol log, her pen scratching against paper as footsteps echoed closer. She looked up to see Sergeant Daniel Harper, his face carved with stern lines. "Martinez," he said, his voice a low rumble, a word. She nodded, following him to an empty conference room where the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and regret. Harper shut the door, crossing his arms as he faced her. "Words going around that some of the younger officers might talk during this review," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I need to know you get what's on the line." Lily tilted her head, her tone careful but edged. "What's on the line?" Harper stepped closer, his voice dropping. "This job's brutal. We make split-second calls, and outsiders don't always get it. If Hayes goes down, it's a domino effect. Next thing you know, they're coming for all of us." Lily's eyes narrowed, her spine stiffening. "Are you saying we should lie?" Harper's jaw twitched. "I'm saying we stick together. One screw-up shouldn't tank the whole team." She didn't answer right away, her mind racing. Then, with a quiet steel in her voice, she said, with respect, "Sergeant, maybe it's time we stopped covering for people who don't belong here." Harper's gaze hardened, a silent standoff stretching between them. Without another word, he turned and left. The door clicking shut behind him, Lily exhaled, her heart pounding. She'd just planted her flag, and there was no retreat now. In Captain Mitchell Grant's office, Maya sat across from him, the tension between them crackling like static. She slid a report across his desk, her voice firm. "Look at the numbers, Grant. Complaints against Hayes aren't new, they go back years. Excessive force, profiling, verbal assaults, and half of them never even got a second glance. Grant leaned back, running a hand through his thinning gray hair, his face etched with fatigue. "I'm not blind to the mess, Bennett," he said, his tone heavy. "But you're asking me to tear down decades of how this place runs. That doesn't happen in a snap." Maya's eyes flashed. "I'm not asking for magic. I'm asking you to lead. If you don't step up, who will?" Grant sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I've seen precincts collapse over Thiscups turning on each other, the public losing faith. Morale in the gutter. Is that your goal?" Maya leaned forward, her voice unwavering. "My goal is a department that protects people, not scares them. If that rattles some cages, so be it." Grant shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You're dancing with flames, Bennett." She stood, her gaze unflinching. "No, I'm snuffing them out." By week's end, the precinct had split into warring camps. Officers like Lily and Ethan teetered on the edge, torn between those hungry for change and those digging in their heels. Victor, meanwhile, doubled down, pacing the break room as he rallied his faithful. "You think this is about justice?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "It's about power. They want us neutered, too afraid to do our damn jobs. You gonna roll over for that?" Murmurs of assent followed, but the room's energy felt brittle, even his staunchest allies eyeing him with doubt. In quieter corners, Ethan and Lily traded hushed words. "You submitting a statement?" she asked one night, her breath catching. Ethan hesitated, his fingers drumming against his knee. "I don't know. Feels like I'd be painting a bullseye on myself." Lily nodded, her eyes fierce. "You're not alone. If enough of us talk, they can't bury it." Ethan swallowed hard. "Maybe, but what if they can?" The tipping point came Friday afternoon when a second memo landed from the top brass. Sharper this time, specific incidents involving Officer Hayes are under investigation. Officers with information are urged to step forward. Victor read it alone, his face darkening as the words sank in. For the first time, he felt the ground shifting beneath him, not just his career, but the entire system he'd leaned on. Justice, he realized too late, wasn't a shield for the powerful. It was a mirror, reflecting every abuse they'd let fester. And as that mirror turned on him, the consequences of his actions loomed larger than he'd ever imagined. The weight of the truth bore down on Victor Hayes like a collapsing building, each brick a reminder that this wasn't some minor reprimand he could shrug off with a forced apology and a handshake. No, this was a brutal, unrelenting attack on the life he'd painstakingly carved out over 15 years, a career forged in the crucible of late-night shifts, grimy crime scenes, and the kind of messes no one else dared touch. Rage churned in his chest, a wildfire spreading through his veins as he stormed down the precinct hallway, his boots slamming against the worn linoleum. He didn't knock when he reached Captain Mitchell Grant's office. The door flew open with a thunderous bang, rattling the frame, and Victor stood there, a memo clutched in his trembling fist like a weapon. "What the hell is this?" he roared, thrusting the paper toward Grant. His voice was raw, jagged with betrayal, his dark eyes blazing with a fury that could have scorched the walls. Behind the desk, Grant didn't so much as blink. The captain's face was a slab of granite, unyielding, his posture rigid in his chair as though he'd been expecting this explosion all along. "It's exactly what it looks like," he said, his tone steady, almost eerily calm. "The review board's digging deeper. Victor, there's nothing I can do to stop it." Victor's breath hitched, disbelief warring with the anger boiling inside him. "You could if you wanted to," he snapped, leaning forward, his knuckles whitening around the crumpled memo. "You've got my back, right? This is all political bullshit, and you know it." His words hung in the air, thick with desperation, a plea masked as a challenge. But Grant's expression shifted, hardening into something colder, more resolute. "This stopped being about politics the second you decided to throw coffee in someone's face," he said, each syllable deliberate, cutting through Victor's defenses like a blade. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy with the weight of that accusation. Victor took a step closer, his broad frame looming over the desk, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl that vibrated with barely contained violence. 15 years, Grant. I've been here 15 damn years, cleaning up the kind of filth you wouldn't even look at. And now you're throwing me under the bus." His chest heaved, his mind racing with memories of sleepless nights, blood-stained alleys, and the unspoken loyalty he'd always assumed would shield him. Grant didn't waver. "I'm doing my job," he replied, his voice still infuriatingly even. "Maybe you should have done yours." For a long, taut moment, Victor stared at him, his face a twisted mask of fury and disbelief. His hands twitched at his sides, itching to lash out, to smash something anything release the storm raging inside him. But Grant's unflinching gaze held him in place, a silent dare to cross a line he couldn't uncross. With a sharp, bitter exhale, Victor turned on his heel and stormed out, the door slamming shut behind him with a force that echoed down the hall like a gunshot. By Monday morning, the storm had broken wide open. The review, once a quiet internal murmur, had spilled into the public's ears, carried on the wind of outrage and curiosity. A local newspaper had seized the story, splashing it across the front page in bold. "Unforgiving Inc. Officer under investigation for alleged misconduct at City Precinct." The article didn't name Victor Hayes outright, but the details were a glaring neon sign pointing straight to him, a senior officer, accused of dousing a civilian with scalding liquid during an interrogation. It went further, hinting at a broader investigation into the precinct's conduct, unearthing years of buried complaints like skeletons clawing their way out of shallow graves. Victor sat in his car before his shift, the newspaper spread across his lap like a map of his unraveling life. His face flushed crimson as he read, his pulse hammering in his ears. The words blurred into a smear of accusation, each sentence a fresh stab at his pride. With a guttural curse, he crumpled the paper into a tight ball and hurled it onto the passenger seat, where it landed with a soft thud amid a clutter of coffee cups and cigarette butts. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles paling, and muttered a string of venomous profanities under his breath, the sound swallowed by the hum of the engine. Inside the precinct, the air was thick with unease, a palpable tension that clung to every corner like damp rot. Officers moved through the halls with the caution of prey sensing a predator nearby, their voices hushed, their eyes darting toward Victor whenever he entered a room. At his desk, Ethan Wells, a weary young officer with sharp features and a perpetual frown, scrolled through the article on his phone, his thumb flicking across the screen with restless energy. Across from him sat Lily Martinez, her dark hair pulled back tightly, her expression a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "It's starting to spiral," she murmured, her voice low, almost lost beneath the hum of the precinct's fluorescent lights. Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "People are scared," he whispered back, glancing around to ensure no one overheard. "If they find more than just Hayes, this review could take down half the damn precinct." Lily's gaze sharpened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Maybe it should," she said, her tone firm, unapologetic. "This place has needed a reckoning for a long time." Her words carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much years of ignored complaints, brushed-off abuses, and a culture that rewarded silence over justice. Ethan didn't reply, but her conviction settled over him like a heavy cloak. He couldn't shake the truth in what she'd said, the nagging sense that the precinct's rot ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit. That afternoon, across town, Maya Bennett sat at a small, weathered table in a cafe near City Hall, the faint aroma of coffee and baked goods mingling with the murmur of conversation. She faced a group of community letters, neighborhood activists, pastors, and organizers who'd spent years banging their fists against the precinct's walls, demanding accountability. Pastor Graham, an older man with silver hair and a voice that carried both gentleness and authority, leaned forward, his hands clasped atop the table. "I'm glad you agreed to meet," he said, his eyes searching hers. "We've been pushing for change in that precinct for years, but nothing ever sticks. Officers like Hayes just get shuffled around, protected." Maya met his gaze, her expression steady, resolute. "Not this time," she replied, her voice quiet but firm, threaded with a promise she intended to keep. "I can't say everything will change overnight, but this review isn't going away." Janice Morgan, another leader with a sharp tongue and a skeptical tilt to her brow, leaned in. "How do we know this isn't just another PR stunt?" she asked, her tone edged with years of broken trust. We've heard promises before. Maya didn't flinch. Because I'm not here to prop up the status quo, she said, holding Janice's stare. I came to this city to dig out the rot that's been festering too long. Trust has to be earned to get that, but this is just the start. We need the community to stand with us. The group exchanged glances, their wariness softening into cautious hope. Pastor Graham nodded slowly, his weathered hands tapping the table. All right, he said. If you're serious about this, we'll back you. But don't expect us to stay quiet if this doesn't lead to real change. Maya's lips curved into a faint, determined smile. You won't have to, she assured him, her mind already racing toward the next step. By midweek, the investigation sharpened into a blade poised to strike. The Internal Review Board issued a statement, its words cold and official. Multiple complaints against Victor Hayes were under scrutiny, and other officers might soon be implicated. Local news channels pounced, their cameras capturing the growing unreached protests sprouting outside the precinct like weeds. Voices rising in chants that reverberated off the brick walls. Victor arrived at work that morning, his jaw clenched as he navigated a gauntlet of demonstrators. Signs bobbed above the crowd, accountability now. End police impunity, their bold letters a stark contrast to the gray sky overhead. He rolled his eyes, his lip curling in disdain as he pushed past. Their jeers and shouts buzzing in his ears like flies he refused to acknowledge. Inside, Captain Grant called an emergency meeting, the conference room packed with senior staff, the air thick with dread. Maya sat near the front, her posture composed but her eyes keen, drinking in every detail. Grant stood at the head of the room, his voice cutting through the tension like a whip. The department's under a microscope right now, he began, his hands braced on the table. Every move we make is being watched, so we damn well better follow protocol to the letter. Victor, slouched in the back, leaned forward, his voice dripping with defiance. With all due respect, Captain, why are we bending over backwards for these people? Half the complaints they're digging up are garbage, yeah, you know it. Grant's eyes snapped to him, sharp and unyielding. If they're garbage, the investigation will prove it. He shot back. But until then, every officer here cooperates, including you, Hayes. Victor's mouth tightened into a hard line, his fists clenching beneath the table. But he held his tongue. Maya watched the exchange, her mind cataloging Grant's resolve. He wasn't one for grandstanding, but even he seemed to feel the tectonic shift beneath their feet, a reckoning too big to ignore. Later that day, Maya stood beside the mayor and police commissioner at a press conference, the city's skyline looming through the windows behind them. The mayor, a polished figure in a crisp suit, gripped the podium, his voice smooth and rehearsed. We take these allegations seriously, he said, addressing the swarm of reporters. Transparency and accountability are our priorities, and Chief Bennett has my full support in this investigation. When Maya stepped forward, her presence commanded attention, calm, measured, but with a fire simmering beneath. This isn't about targeting individuals or tearing down the police, she said, her voice steady. It's about rebuilding trust. This city deserves a department that's served with integrity, and I'm here to make that happen. A reporter's hand shot up. Chief Bennett, do you think this review will lead to charges against Officer Hayes or others? Maya's gaze didn't waver. That depends on what we find, she replied. But let's be clear, no one's above the law, not even in this department. Her words crackled through the room, a vow etched in stone, and by evening, they were plastered across every news broadcast in the city. The precinct drowned in the aftermath, phones ringing off the hook, emails flooding in from furious citizens, protests swelling outside with each passing hour. Victor's frustration erupted that night at a diner on the city's edge, where he met Alan Cooper, his union rep. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Victor's haggard face as he stabbed his fork into a plate of congealing eggs. They're making me the villain, he growled, his voice thick with resentment. I've given my life to this job, and this is what I get. Cooper sighed, rubbing his temples. It's not about what you've done, Victor, it's about what they see. You're the poster boy for everything the community hates about us. Lay low. Let me handle it. Lay low. Victor's voice rose, sharp and incredulous. They're shredding my career, and you want me to just sit here? Cooper's eyes narrowed, his patience fraying. You got a better plan, because if you go out there swinging, you'll only dig your hole deeper." Victor's fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms. He felt trapped, powerless, a sensation so foreign it gnawed at his core, leaving him raw and exposed. The pressure didn't relent as the week wore on. Maya buried herself in old complaints, her desk a chaos of files and coffee mugs, her eyes tracing patterns of abuse that stretched back years. Each discovery tightened the noose around Victor and the system that had shielded him. A damning tapestry of negligence and arrogance. She knew the next move would be pivotal. Community's eyes were on her, and the precinct's fate teetered on a knife's edge. Meanwhile, Victor felt the walls closing in. Even his staunchest alliesmen he'd shared beers and battle scars with kept their distance, their sit-along glances laced with fear of the fallout. For the first time, he tasted the bitter sting of consequences, a shadow he couldn't outrun. The precinct was a tomb when the officers filed into the conference room days later, the silence suffocating. Rumors had swirled all morning. Announcements were coming, and no one knew who'd be left standing when the dust settled. Some sat with arms crossed, defiance etched into their postures, while others fidgeted, their nerves betraying them. Grant stood at the front, flanked by to review board members, the city's police insignia glowing ominously on the screen behind them. Victor entered last, his footsteps deliberate, his shoulders squared despite the exhaustion carving lines into his face. He scanned the room, catching a few fleeting nods from his fading circle of supporters. But the quiet told a louder story. His influence was crumbling, and even his loyalists were hedging their bets. "Take your seats," Grant commanded, his voice a steel rod through the haze. The officers complied, their eyes locking onto him, waiting for the axe to fall. In that moment, the room held its breath, suspended between the past's corruption and the promise of justice, a lesson unfolding in real time about the cost of power misused and the unyielding demand for accountability. The air in the precinct meeting room hung heavy, thick with unspoken tension, as Captain Grant stood at the front, his broad shoulders squared against the weight of what was about to unfold. His deep voice carried a measured calm as he introduced the two figures seated beside him. Helen Park, a fiercely sharp investigator whose piercing gaze could unravel a lie from across the room, and Jonathan Willis, a steely lawyer whose no-nonsense demeanor had earned him a reputation as a relentless advocate for police accountability. Grant's eyes swept over the assembled officers, his expression stern yet tinged with a quiet resolve. "We're gathered here today," he began, "not to cast blame on those who serve honorably, but to confront the persistent issues plaguing this precinct. This isn't about punishing the good, it's about rooting out the rot, to preserve the trust this community deserves." His words lingered, deliberate and heavy, as if he could feel the storm brewing beneath the surface. Victor Hayes sat near the back, his chair tilted slightly as he leaned back with a casual arrogance that bordered on defiance. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, his arms crossed tightly over his chest as if daring anyone to challenge him. He'd weathered scrutiny before, years of it, and each time he'd emerged unscathed, bolstered by a network of loyalty and silence. To him, this was just another formality, another performance he'd outlast. But as Helen Park rose to her feet, the air shifted. Her presence was commanding, her voice slicing through the room's tension like a freshly honed blade. "Over the past month," she said, her tone crisp and unyielding, "we've dug deep into the complaints lodged against this precinct. What we've found isn't a handful of stray missteps, it's a disturbing pattern, a thread of misconduct woven into the fabric here. And at the center of it is Officer Victor Hayes." All eyes swiveled toward him, and for a fleeting moment, that smug grin wavered, a crack splintering through his carefully crafted facade. Helen's words didn't falter as she pressed on, her gaze locking onto Victor with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. "This isn't about isolated slip-ups," she continued. "This is about a culture, a festering environment where some officers have operated as if the rules don't apply, shielded by apathy and unspoken agreements. Justice has been sidelined, and power has taken its place." The room buzzed with low murmurs, a ripple of unease spreading among the officers. Some stared at their hands, others at the wall, anywhere but at Victor, whose knuckles whitened as he gripped the arms of his chair. Just then, the door creaked open, and a new presence stepped into the fray, silencing the whispers like a sudden gust snuffing out a flame. Maya Bennett entered with a quiet authority that seemed to reshape the space around her. Clad in a crisp navy blazer, she moved with the steady grace of someone who knew the weight of her mission. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, accentuating the sharp lines of her face, and her eye steady and unflinching swept the room before settling briefly on Victor. He stiffened, his jaw tightening as memories flooded back. The interrogation room. The clash of wills, the moment he'd underestimated her. Now, her mere presence sent a shiver of dread down his spine. Though he masked it with a narrowing of his eyes, Captain Grant cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the charged silence. For those who don't know her yet, this is Chief Maya Bennett. She's been spearheading this investigation from the start. Maya stepped forward, her posture unwavering as she addressed the room. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "I'm not here for small talk. Let's get to the truth." With a subtle flick of her thumb, she pressed a button on the remote in her hand, and the room filled with sound. Victor's voice, dripping with venom and arrogance. "You think you're in charge here? Let me show you who's really in charge." The audio crackled, followed by the sickening splash of liquid and a sharp, pained gasp Maya's own. The recording cut off abruptly, leaving a silence so thick it seemed to press against the walls. Victor bolted upright, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is absurd," he barked, his voice trembling with indignation. "She set me up, planned this." "Sit down, Officer Hayes," Maya cut in, her tone frigid and unyielding. Victor froze mid-step, his chest heaving as fury and fear warred within him. For a moment, he considered defying her, but the weight of her stare pinned him in place. Slowly, reluctantly, he sank back into his seat, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Maya turned her attention back to the room, her voice steady as she continued. "What you just heard isn't a one-off mistake or a bad day caught on tape. It's a window into what's gone wrong. A culture that's exalted power over duty, loyalty over justice. That ends today. Effective immediately. Officer Hayes is suspended pending a full investigation." Victor's hand slammed down on the table, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. "You can't do this," he roared, his face flushing a deep crimson. 15 years, I've served 15 years. Maya didn't flinch, and in those 15 years, she shot back, her voice rising just enough to match his. "You've racked up more complaints than anyone in this precinct. 15 years of intimidating the people you swore to protect. That stops now." Her words landed like a hammer, and Victor's bravado faltered, his anger giving way to a flicker of something darker, panic, perhaps, or the dawning realization of his own vulnerability. He slumped back, silent for once, as Maya's gaze swept across the room once more. "To the rest of you," she said, her tone softening but losing none of its resolve. "This isn't about hunting down every officer. I know many of you pour your hearts into this work with honor, but integrity isn't just personal, it's collective. It's about calling out what's wrong, not turning a blind eye. Silence protects no one but the guilty, and when one of us falls, it stains us all." The room remained still, the weight of her message settling over the officers like a fog. Some avoided her eyes, their faces etched with guilt or shame. Others sat rigid, their expressions unreadable, wrestling with their own thoughts. The meeting drew to a close shortly after, but its echoes lingered, rippling through the precinct as officers dispersed to their desks, their footsteps heavy with the day's revelations. In a quiet corner, Ethan Wells and Lily Martinez sat huddled together, their voices low but charged with emotion. Lily's hands fidgeted with a pen, her dark eyes wide with a mix of awe and determination. "She did it," she whispered, almost to herself. "She actually called him out right there, in front of everyone." Ethan nodded slowly, his brow furrowed as he processed the whirlwind they'd just witnessed. "I didn't think it'd happen," he admitted, his voice rough with disbelief. "Not this fast. Not like this." Lily glanced at him, her lips pressing into a firm line. "She's not playing games. Ethan, maybe it's time we stopped holding back to." He met her gaze, and this time, his nod was resolute, a spark of conviction igniting in his chest. "You're right. This is our shadow step up, to make it right. We can't let it slip away." Meanwhile, Victor sat alone in the precinct's break room. the dim fluorescent light casting harsh shadows across his face. His head rested in his hands, fingers digging into his scalp as the reality of his unraveling world pressed down on him. For years, he'd thrived in the gray space-building alliances with a wink and a handshake, bending rules with a grin, secure in the belief that he was untouchable. But now, that illusion was shattering. Piece by jagged piece, the door swung open and Alan Cooper, his union rep, stepped inside, his weathered face etched with grim determination. "We need to talk," Cooper said, pulling out a chair with a scrape that grated against Victor's frayed nerves. Victor looked up, his eyes blazing with a volatile mix of rage and desperation. "You've got to fix this, Alan," he snapped. "That recording set me up, you know it." Cooper sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of what he had to say. "Victor, you're not hearing me. This isn't just about the recording. It's your whole record years of complaints, whispers, and warnings brushed under the rug. It's the culture you've leaned on, the one that's kept you afloat. It's all coming out now, and you're the poster child for it." Victor's fist crashed onto the table, the sound sharp and hollow. "So what, you're just gonna let them string me up?" Cooper's voice hardened, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of sympathy. "I'm here to fight for your rights, same as always. But you need to see the bigger picture. The department's scrambling to save its image, and they'll sacrifice whoever they have to, including you." For the first time, Victor's anger ebbed, replaced by a cold, sinking dread as the full scope of his predicament crystallized. That evening, Maya returned to her office, the faint hum of the precinct fading behind her as she closed the door. She sank into her chair, the day's reports spread across her desk like a battlefield map. Her fingers traced the edges of a file as she replayed the meeting in her mind. Tension, the defiance, the fragile hope flickering in the eyes of officers like Ethan and Lily. She knew this was only the beginning. Suspending Victor was a strike, but dismantling the entrenched culture he'd thrived in would be a war fought in the shadows of bureaucracy, in the streets outside, and in the hearts of those still wavering. Her phone buzzed, a message from Captain Grant lighting up the screen. "Review board wants follow-ups with Martinez and Wells. Thought you'd want to know." A faint smile tugged at her lips as she leaned back, the pieces of her plan slowly slotting into place. The road ahead loomed long and treacherous. Throats swelled outside. Community voices demanded answers, and resistance simmered within. But for the first time, she felt the tide turning. The reckoning had begun, and she would see it through. Word of Victor's suspension spread like wildfire, igniting whispers within the precinct and headlines across the city. To some, it was a long overdue victory, a sign that justice might finally pierce the department's armor. To others, it was a stark warning that even the most entrenched could fall. For Victor, it was a personal collapse. He retreated to his cramped apartment, the blinds drawn tight against the world outside. His phone buzzed incessantly, reports fishing for a soundbite, neighbors venting their outrage, old colleagues offering tepid condolences or pointed distance. He let it ring, the sound blending into the drone of the television, where news anchors dissected his downfall over grainy footage of protesters. "The suspension signals a seismic shift," one commentator intoned. "Chief Maya Bennett has drawn a line in the sand, reform or reckoning." Victor jabbed the remote, silencing the screen, and slumped onto the couch, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as regret and defiance churned within him. A sharp knock jolted him from his spiraling thoughts. He dragged himself to the door, his movements sluggish, and found Alan Cooper standing there, his face a mask of weary resolve. "You've been dodging my calls," Cooper said, stepping inside uninvited, his briefcase thudding onto the coffee table. Victor shut the door with a grunt and crossed his arms. "What do you want, Alan?" Cooper turned, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "We need to talk options." Victor barked a bitter laugh. "Options? Bennett's got it out for me. That recording's already buried. Mayu saw it." Cooper's sigh was heavy, his hands resting on the table as he met Victor's gaze. "You're not wrong. The recording's damning, and the complaints pile higher than you'd like to admit. But you've still got rights, and the union's in your corner. The question is how far you're willing to push this and how much you're ready to face." Victor's defiance wavered, his mind racing as the consequences of his actions loomed larger than ever, a shadow he could no longer outrun. Through it all, the lesson burned clear. Justice, when wielded with resolve, could topple even the mightiest towers of power. But the cost of abusing that power off, twisting it into a shield for arrogance and impunity, was a fall that left no one unscathed. For Victor, it was a personal ruin. For the precinct, a chance at redemption. And for Maya, a fight to ensure the scales stayed balanced, no matter the odds. Victor Hayes stood in the dim light of his cramped apartment, his narrowed eyes fixed on Alan Cooper, who sat across from him on a sagging leather couch. The air between them crackled with tension, thick with unspoken accusations and the faint scent of stale coffee. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Victor asked, his voice tight, a storm brewing beneath his words. Cooper leaned back, his posture relaxed but his gaze piercing, as if he could see straight through Victor's crumbling defenses. "I'm saying you've got options. Hayes, you could drag this mess into arbitration, claim the investigation's a sham, argue your suspension was a knee-jerk overreach. We might not come out on top, but it'll buy you time. Throw a wrench in their gears." He paused, his tone softening, a rare crack in his usual steel. "Or, hear me out, you could stop running from the truth and own what you've done." Victor's bitter laugh cut through the room like a jagged blade. "Own what? Doing my damn job?" His fists clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening as years of pent-up defiance surged to the surface. Cooper's expression hardened, his voice sharpening to match. "Was that your job in there, Victor? Hurling coffee at a civilian? Snarling at witnesses until they cowered? Don't kid yourself, that's not what you signed up for, and you damn well know it." The words landed like a punch, and Victor's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath the stubble. He wanted to fire back, to spit venom and justifications, but something held him silent, a gnawing doubt he couldn't shake. Cooper leaned closer, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes boring into Victor's. "You're standing at a fork in the road, man. You can double down, play the martyr, and fight until you've got nothing left but bruises and a ruined name. Or you can face the music, admit you screwed up, and start clawing your way back to something real." Victor turned away, his shoulders slumping under an invisible weight. He stared at the peeling wallpaper, its faded pattern a mirror to his fraying resolve. He ached to argue, to scream that he'd been wronged, but deep in his gut, a memory clawed its way up. Maya Bennett's voice, calm but unyielding, echoing in the precinct. "Your actions don't just stain you, Victor. They drag every officer in this room down with you." That truth festered, a splinter he couldn't pull out. Meanwhile, miles away in the precinct's quiet corner, Maya Bennett hunched over her desk, the clock ticking past midnight. Her office was a fortress of flickering fluorescent light and towering stacks of paper, the air heavy with the musty smell of old files. She pored over the latest reports from the Internal Review Board, her brow furrowed as she traced the damning threads of Victor's career. Complaints stretched back years, angry scribbles of injustice, most swept under the rug by a system too lazy or too complicit to care. Her fingers tightened around her pen, ink bleeding into the page as she circled another overlooked incident. This wasn't just about Victor, she realized, her thoughts churning like a restless sea. It was about the rot he'd thrived in, a culture that turned a blind eye until the damage spilled over. A sharp knock jolted her from her reverie. "Come in," she called, sliding the file aside with a weary sigh. The door creaked open, and Ethan Wells stepped inside, his young face a tangle of nerves and resolve. He clutched the edge of his uniform cap, his knuckles pale from the grip. "Officer Wells," Maya said, her voice steady as she gestured to the chair opposite her. "What's on your mind?" Ethan hesitated, sinking into the seat, his hands fidgeting like trapped birds. "I've been thinking about everything," he started, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Hayes, the precinct, my part in it all. I can't stop turning it over in my head." Maya leaned back, her chair creaking softly, her expression a mask of calm curiosity. "Keep going." Ethan swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing as he met her gaze. "I saw things over the years. Stuff Hayes did, stuff others let slide. I kept my mouth shut because it was easier, safer. I told myself it wasn't my place to stir the pot." His voice cracked, heavy with shame. "Why bring it up now?" Maya asked, her tone measured but edged with steel. Ethan straightened, a flicker of defiance lighting his eyes. "Because I'm done being that guy. I want to be better. I want to help fix this mess, if there's a way. For a long moment, Maya studied him, her silence a test of his resolve. Then she nodded, a faint spark of approval in her eyes. It takes guts to own up to that. If you mean it, there's work you can do, real work. Ethan leaned forward, eager, almost desperate. Tell me how. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line as she considered him. Start with the truth. If the review board calls you up, give them a statement raw, unfiltered. Don't gloss over what you've seen, and don't stop there. Hold the others accountable. Change doesn't come from one investigation. It comes when people like you stop looking away. Ethan nodded, a weight lifting from his chest as purpose took root. The next morning, Ethan marched to the review board's office, his boots echoing on the linoleum. His statement pages of shaky handwriting laid bare the precinct's underbelly, Victor's outbursts, the hushed agreements to ignore them, the fear that kept dissent quiet. It was a turning point, a crack in the dam. His words rippled outward, stirring others to step forward. A grizzled veteran recounted Victor's temper tantrums with weary precision. A rookie whispered about hushed threats she'd overheard. The board scrambled to weave these threads into a tapestry of accountability, their focus widening from Victor's missteps to the systemic failures that propped him up. Victor, though, felt the walls closing in. The precinct, once his kingdom, now buzzed with whispers and averted eyes. His old alias cops, who'd clapped him on the back and laughed at his bravado, slipped away, their loyalty evaporating like morning mist. Even Cooper, with his slick suits and calculated advice, grew distant, his words clipped and hollow. Late one night, Victor sprawled on his couch, surrounded by a graveyard of old case files. The room was dark save for the glow of a single lamp, casting long shadows across the clutter. He'd spent years building a fortress of self-righteousness, convincing himself every harsh word, every thrown cup was justified. But now doubt gnawed at him. Had he crossed the line long before that coffee hit the wall? His thumb hovered over his phone, scrolling through contacts until Maya's name glared back at him. His heart thudded, a mix of dread and resolve. He pressed call. She picked up on the second ring, her voice crisp. "Bennett, it's Hayes," he said, low and rough. A beat of silence stretched between them. "What do you want?" she finally asked. Victor exhaled, the sound ragged. "I need to see you, in person, about everything. I've got a lot to answer for, and I'm ready to start." She didn't reply immediately, and he could almost hear her weighing his words. The next afternoon, Maya sat in her office, sunlight slanting through the blinds. When her assistant poked her head in, "Chief, Victor Hayes is here," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Maya's eyebrow arched, but she nodded. "Send him in." The door swung open and Victor entered, a shadow of his former self. Gone was the cocky strut, his shoulders hunched. His eyes carried a weariness that aged him beyond his years. "Chief Bennett," he said, formal and strained. "Officer Hayes," she replied, motioning to the chair. "Sit." He obeyed, the chair creaking under him. Silence hung heavy, thick with unspoken history. Maya watched him, noting the tension in his clenched hands, the exhaustion etched into his face. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble. "I've been thinking a lot. Too much, maybe. Good," Maya said, unflinching. "You've got plenty to chew on." Victor nodded, dragging a hand through his hair, strands sticking to his damp forehead. "I'm not here to fight or make excuses. I know I was wrong what I did, what I've been doing. I don't know when it all went so sideways." "Take your time," Maya said, her tone firm but patient. Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his breath uneven. "When I started, I wanted to change things, make a dent in the chaos. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being about the job. It became about power, about me calling the shots, doing it my way." Maya's gaze held steady, unyielding. "And the people you hurt, did you ever stop to think about them?" Victor flinched, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Not enough. I told myself it was for the greater good, keeping order. But it wasn't. It was me unloading my crap on people who didn't deserve it." Maya let his confession linger, the air thick with its weight. "Do you know how many complaints are stacked against you?" Victor grimaced, his voice barely above a whisper. "Too many. And they went nowhere because the system didn't care. I thought that made me bulletproof. Now I see it just made me sloppy. Maya's eyes narrowed, her words cutting clean. Regret's a start, Hayes, but it doesn't undo the damage in it to me. Not to the people you swore to protect, not to the trust you shattered. I know, Victor said, his throat tight. I'm not begging for forgiveness. I'm asking for a shot to make it right. Maya tilted her head, sizing him up. How? He hesitated, then pressed on. I want to leave the force. I can't stay, not after this. But I don't want to just slink off. I've been talking to some community groups. There's this program for at-risk kids. Keeps them off the streets. I could help, maybe show them what not to be. For the first time, Maya's expression softened. Just a fraction, that's something. But stepping down doesn't wipe the slate clean. If you want redemption, you've got to own it out loud. Face the community. Tell them what you did. Victor swallowed hard, fear flashing in his eyes. You think they'll hear me out? Maybe not, Maya said bluntly. But it's not about them. It's about you proving you've learned something. Justice isn't a free pass, it's a mirror. And consequences, they're what keep power from eating people alive. Victor left her office an hour later, his mind a whirlwind of humility and clarity. For years, he'd leaned on a system that shielded him. But now he saw it for what it was, a crutch that let him limp through his failures. Justice, he realized, wasn't just a word, it was a reckoning. And the lesson burned deep. Power unchecked was a poison, and he'd drunk too much of it for too long. Victor Hayes stood alone in the dim light of his small apartment, the weight of his choices pressing down on him like a suffocating fog. For years, he'd worn his badge as a shield, deflecting the consequences of his actions with the arrogance of unchecked power. Now, stripped of that armor, he faced the raw, unfiltered truth for the first time. His hands trembled as he folded his uniform, the creases sharp against the fabric. Each fold a silent admission of the lines he'd crossed. The precinct had once been his kingdom, a place where loyalty trumped justice, and he'd thrived in its shadows. But tonight, as the city buzzed faintly beyond his window, Victor felt the sting of accountability pierce through the illusions he'd built. He wasn't just stepping down from his Rala, was stepping into a reckoning, one that forced him to stare into the mirror of his own failures. Meanwhile, across town in the precinct's cluttered conference room, Maya Bennett sat at the head of a long table, her gaze steady, but her mind racing. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paper, a testament to the endless hours she'd poured into unraveling the mess Victor had left behind. His resignation was a victory, yes, but it was a fragile one. A single thread pulled from a tangled web of corruption that stretched far beyond one man. She tapped her pen against a stack of files, each one a piece of the puzzle she was determined to solve. The precinct's problems weren't just deep, they were rooted in a culture that had festered for years. A system where officers protected their own at the expense of the people they'd sworn to serve. Justice, she thought, wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about dismantling the machinery that let them thrive. With a deep breath, she called the meeting to order, her voice cutting through the low hum of murmured conversations. Helen Park, the lead investigator, stood at the front of the room, her posture rigid but her eyes sharp with purpose. She adjusted her glasses, peering down at a clipboard thick with notes, and began her report. We've collected statements from multiple officers, Wells, Martinez, and a few others, she said, her tone measured but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. What they've told us isn't pretty. It's a vivid portrait of a precinct where loyalty was currency and accountability was a dirty word. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room like dust after a storm. There's a stack of complaints against other officers too, not just Hayes. We're digging through them now, but it's already clear this wasn't a one-off. Complaints were buried, ignored, dismissed, swept under the rug without a second glance. If we're serious about fixing this, we need to rip out the old playbook and start over. Maya's jaw tightened, but she nodded, her mind already spinning with the implications. The precinct wasn't just flawed, it was fractured, and repairing it would take more than a few policy changes. It would demand a relentless, collective effort to uproot the rot. Then we'll do it, she said, her voice firm, resonating with a quiet resolve that silenced the room. We'll overhaul how these cases are handled from the ground up. As the meeting stretched on, The atmosphere in the precinct began to shift, subtle but palpable. Officers who'd once shrugged off the whispers of misconduct now found themselves caught in a tide of introspection. Some leaned into the change, hungry to reclaim a sense of honor they'd lost along the way. Others dug in their heels, their faces etched with defiance, clinging to a past where power answered to no one. Ethan Wells, a weary officer with a mop of dark hair and a quiet intensity, emerged as an unlikely beacon amid the chaos. He'd spent years keeping his head down, avoiding the moral quagmire that defined the precinct. But Maya's determination had sparked something in him. Standing in front of a packed training room, he faced a sea of skeptical FASA veterans with decades on the force, and rookies still green behind the ears. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the scuffed linoleum floor. "This isn't about pointing fingers," he began, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "It's about owning up to what we've done here, haven't done, and making damn sure we don't let this community down again. If we can't question ourselves, how can we expect anyone else to believe in us?" His words hung in the air, met with a mix of grudging nods and folded arms. Sergeant Daniel Harper, a grizzled veteran with a permanent scowl, leaned back in his chair, his beefy arms crossed tight over his chest. He'd seen it all in his 20 years riots, shootouts, the slow grind of bureaucracy, and he wasn't impressed. "So what, we're supposed to overthink every move we make out there?" he grumbled, his voice rough as gravel. "Hesitate in the field, and you're dead." Ethan met his gaze, unflinching. "No one's saying freeze up, but we've got to know when we've gone too far. Pretending everything's fine when it's not, that's what dug this hole. Justice doesn't bend for our egos, Harper." The older man's jaw clenched, his silence a reluctant concession, though his narrowed eyes betrayed a simmering resentment. On the other side of the precinct's fractured world, Lily Martinez moved with a quiet grace, her dark eyes warm but resolute. She stood in the community center's main hall, the wooden floor creaking under the weight of a restless crowd. Folding chairs scraped against the ground as residents, young mothers, gray-haired retirees, teenagers with wary expressions filed in, their voices a chorus of hope and skepticism. Maya had tasked Lily with bridging the chasm between the precinct and the people it had failed, and she felt the responsibility like a stone in her chest. At the latest forum, a middle-aged woman rose from her seat, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of her sweater. "My son," she said, her voice cracking like dry earth. "He was just walking home from school last year. An officer stopped him, treated him like he'd robbed a bank. He's 13, and now he flinches every time he sees a patrol car." Lily's heart sank, but she held the woman's gaze, her own eyes soft with empathy. "I'm so sorry that happened," she said, her words deliberate, each one a promise. "No one should feel that way, especially not a kid. We're fighting to change that, and I'd like to sit down with y'all here more. Figure out how we can make this right." The woman hesitated, her lips pursed, then gave a slow nod. "Okay, but I'm watching." "Words are cheap." Nearby, Maya observed from the edge of the room, her arms crossed, a flicker of pride warming her chest. These forums weren't just talk, they were a lifeline, a fragile bridge over a river of distrust. Back at the precinct, not everyone was on board. In the break room, a cluster of officers huddled around a chipped table, the air thick with the scent of burnt coffee and quiet rebellion. Harper stabbed a finger at the air, his voice low but laced with venom. "This is spiraling out of control. We're jumping through hoops to appease people who'll never get it, folks who've never had to make a split-second call with a gun in their face." Tom Reeker, a weary officer with a perpetual smirk, nodded. "Hayes screwed up, sure, but now we're all under the magnifying glass. It's like they think we're the enemy." Across the room, Ethan overheard, his coffee cup pausing halfway to his lips. He approached, his steps deliberate, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to their bristling frustration. "They're not out to control us," he said evenly. "They're asking us to fix what's broken. If we don't, we're just handing them more reasons to doubt us." Harper's lip curled, but he said nothing, the tension crackling between them like static. Victor, meanwhile, had traded his badge for a folding chair in a youth center basement, surrounded by a dozen teenagers with guarded eyes and restless energy. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting a cold glow over the concrete walls plastered with faded posters. Mentoring at-risk kids wasn't redemption, it was penance. A daily confrontation with the man he'd become. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke to a boy slouched in the back. "I messed up out there," he said, his voice rough but honest. "Thought I could bend the rules because I had the power. Didn't work out so well." The kid smirked, but his eyes flickered with curiosity. Later that night, Victor's phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Accountability's not a one-time deal. Keep going." He stared at the screen, the words searing into him, then typed back, "I will." His fingers unsteady but determined. The precinct wasn't the same. The review board's report landed like a thunderclap, its pages detailing not just Victor's sins but a system that had shielded him, a culture of ignored complaints, half-hearted investigations, and loyalty twisted into a weapon against justice. At a press conference, Maya stood beside the commissioner, the cameras flashing like gunfire. "This is a wake-up call," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Power without accountability erodes everything we stand for. We owe this city better." The reforms rolled out new protocols, an oversight committee, expanded outreach, but the road was long, and the scars deep. Ethan and Lily pressed on, their efforts a quiet rebellion against the old ways, while Victor carved out a new purpose, one shaky step at a time. The lesson was clear. Justice wasn't a gift, it was a fight, and the cost of abusing power echoed far beyond the fall of any one man. The precinct buzzed with a quiet energy that hadn't existed before, a shift Ethan Wells could feel deep in his bones. Years of rigid division, cops on one side, the community on the other, had begun to erode, replaced by something fragile but real: collaboration. He stood in the precinct's dimly lit break room, coffee cup in hand, gazing out at his fellow officers. Some wore thoughtful looks, their brows furrowed as they processed the changes unfolding around them. Others chatted in low tones, their voices carrying a mix of cautious optimism and lingering doubt. Ethan's chest swelled with a quiet pride. "It's not about us against them," he'd said more times than he could count, his voice steady with conviction. "It's about building something better together." Change was a slow beast, lumbering and stubborn, but it was moving. He could see it in the way his colleagues lingered over their conversations, weighing the idea that safety wasn't just about control, it was about trust. Across town, Victor Hayes sat in a worn folding chair, surrounded by a circle of teenagers whose eyes flickered between skepticism and curiosity. Life outside the force had hit him like a cold wind, stripping away the armor of authority he'd worn for decades. He'd traded his badge for a clipboard and a battered notebook, joining a mentorship program for at-risk youth. It wasn't the kind of work that earned applause or headlines, just a small room in a community center, with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights, but it filled a void he hadn't known existed. That afternoon, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the faint hum of traffic outside. Victor leaned forward, his broad shoulders hunched, and began to speak. "I spent years carrying a gun and a title," he said, his gravelly voice cutting through the quiet. "I thought that made me untouchable, but I was wrong." He paused, his gaze drifting to the cracked linoleum floor. Memories of his mistakes clawing at him, nights spent justifying actions he couldn't take back, faces of people he'd failed haunting his dreams. A boy, barely 16, with a faded hoodie and wary eyes, raised his hand. "Why tell us this now?" he asked, his tone sharp but tinged with something softer, maybe hope. Victor's throat tightened. He met the boy's stare, feeling the weight of every choice he'd ever made. "Because I don't want you to end up like me," he said, his words raw and heavy. "I hurt people because I thought power gave me the right. It doesn't. It's a responsibility. And I blew it. You've got a shot to do better. To choose right over easy." The boy nodded slowly, his expression shifting as if a door had cracked open inside him. Victor exhaled, a flicker of redemption warming his chest. Justice, he realized, wasn't just punishment, it was the chance to rebuild what you'd broken. Meanwhile, Maya Bennett sat at her desk, the faint glow of her computer screen casting shadows across her face. The precinct's transformation consumed her every waking moment, a relentless tide she refused to let pull her under. She'd inherited a department riddled with cracks, distrust, corruption, apathy, but she'd planted seeds of change, and now they were sprouting, fragile but stubborn. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. A text from Lily Martinez lit up the screen. Another forum tonight. Packed house. People are opening up. Maya's lips curved into a faint smile, a rare moment of lightness breaking through her exhaustion. She leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking under her weight, and let herself feel it, hope. It wasn't loud or triumphant, just a quiet ember glowing in the dark. Progress was agonizingly slow, like watching a glacier carve a valley, but it was real. She glanced out her window at the precinct parking lot, where officers milled about under the sodium glow of streetlights. Some walked with purpose, their heads high, others shuffled, shoulders slumped, still wrestling with the new rules. The old waste-brushing complaints under the rug, flexing power without consequence where dying, but not without a fight. Maya knew the lesson well. Justice demanded vigilance, and power unchecked was a poison that rotted everything it touched. The next morning, the precinct's conference room hummed with tension as officers filed in for a meeting Maya had called. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of burnt coffee and the rustle of uniforms. Ethan and Lily took seats near the front, their postures relaxed but alert, while Sergeant Daniel Harper lingered near the back, arms crossed, his weathered face set in a scowl. The room fell silent as Maya stepped forward, her presence filling the space like a steady current. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "We've been working to rebuild trust with the people we serve. It's not a quick fix, it's a grind, day in and day out. But it's happening." She paused, letting her words settle, her sharp gaze sweeping the room. "Over the past month, complaints are down. Response times are faster. The community's starting to believe in us again. That's because of you." A ripple of movement passed through the crowd, shoulders straightening, a few nods. Even Harper's frown softened, though his eyes remained hard. But Maya wasn't done. Her tone sharpened, cutting through the easing tension. "This isn't a victory lap. Reform isn't a box we check and move on from. It's a promise we keep every single day. And that means accountability, for all of us." She nodded to Helen Park, a weary officer with a no-nonsense air, who stepped forward clutching a stack of papers. "Starting now," Helen said, her voice clipped. "All internal complaints go to an independent oversight committee. No more hiding, no more excuses." Murmurs erupted, a low rumble of unease. Harper raised a hand, his gravelly voice breaking through. "Chief, with respect, aren't we tying our own hands here? The public already watches us like hawkstow. We need more eyes." Maya met his stare, unflinching. "Yes, Sergeant. Accountability isn't a weakness, it's our strength. The community deserves transparency, and so do we. If we can't face scrutiny, we don't belong in these uniforms." Harper's jaw clenched, but he sank back into his seat, silenced if not convinced. As the meeting broke, the room buzzed with debate, officers clustering in knots, their voices a tangle of frustration and reluctant agreement. Ethan caught up to Maya in the hall, his footsteps quick. "You handled that like a pro," he said, admiration lighting his eyes. She sighed, rubbing her temple. "Handling it isn't fixing it, Ethan. We're just getting started." He grinned, undeterred. "Still feels like we're moving forward." She nodded, a ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. "Thanks to people like you and Lily. You're carrying this as much as I am." Ethan ducked his head, a flush creeping up his neck. "Just doing my job," he muttered. "Keep doing it," she said firmly, her voice a quiet command. Across town, Victor stood in the community center's cramped meeting room, facing another group of teens. The afternoon sun slanted through dusty blinds, painting stripes of light across their faces, some guarded, others curious. He'd grown used to the routine, the creak of chairs, the faint smell of sweat and cheap cleaning products, the weight of their stares. "Power's a tricky thing," he began, his voice low but steady. "I used to think it meant I could bend the world to fit me. I was wrong." He paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back, the memory of his old life siren wails. Barked orders, the rush of control flushing through his mind. "It's a weight you carry, and if you drop it, it crushes you." A boy in the back, his cap pulled low, raised a hand. "That what happened to you?" he asked. his tone blunt but not cruel. Victor stopped, the question slicing into him. He nodded, slow and deliberate. Yeah, I let it twist me. Thought I was above the rules. Hurt people because I could. But it matters every choice, every person. I'm here because I want you to see that before it's too late. The boy tilted his head, chewing on Victor's words, a spark of understanding flickering in his eyes. For Victor, it was a life-a fragile thread tying him to something good. Back at the precinct, the changes Maya had fought for were taking root. Complaints about misconduct had plummeted, a statistic that felt like a small victory in a war far from won. Lily Martinez had become the heart of the outreach efforts, her warm energy drawing people in. One evening, she stood in a high school gymnasium, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and the murmur of a packed crowd. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the floor, filled with residence parents, workers, kids eager to be heard. Flanked by Maya and a handful of officers, Lily opened the forum, her voice ringing out. "We're here to listen," she said, her smile genuine. "Tell us what's working, what's not, and how we can do better." A man in the second row stood, his weathered hands clasped tight. "I've been here 30 years, he said, his voice steady but edged with pain. "Seen too many cops treat us like suspects just for existing. What's changing that?" Maya stepped forward, her posture calm but resolute. "You're right," she said, meeting his gaze. "Bias has festered here too long. We're tackling it, training, oversight, real consequences. But words aren't enough. We're proving it with action." The man nodded, his stern face softening just enough to signal he'd wait and watch. As the night wore on, voices rose and fell angry, hopeful. Rauch won a brick in the bridge Lily and Maya were building. Weeks bled into months, and the precinct began to feel different, lighter, somehow. Ethan and Lily led by quiet example, their dedication a steady drumbeat others couldn't ignore. Even Harper, with his gruff skepticism, started to bend, his complaints growing quieter, his presence at forums more frequent. The community watched, weary but thawing, testing the promises they'd heard too many times before. One night, Maya sat alone in her office, a progress report spread before her. The numbers glowed, fewer grievances, more trust, a department pulling itself upright. But she didn't linger on them. Change wasn't a finish line, it was a road, rough and endless. Her phone buzzedly again. Forum was solid, good feedback. "They're starting to believe us." Maya smiled, a tired but real curve of her lips. Across town, Victor sat at his kitchen table, a lesson plan half-written, when his phone lit up. A text from a kid in his program. "Thanks for today. Helped me think straight." He stared at it, a lump rising in his throat. It wasn't absolution, but it was enough. The precinct, the community, the people were all learning the same hard truth. Power could build or break, and justice was the cost of getting it wrong. The precinct buzzed with a quiet energy, a stark contrast to the chaos of years past. New policies had taken root like stubborn weeds breaking through cracked pavements, slow, deliberate, but impossible to ignore. Every complaint now landed on the desk of an independent oversight board, a group of stern-faced civilians who pored over each case with the meticulousness of archaeologists, unearthing fragile bones. Officers once accustomed to acting on instinct alone, now shuffled into mandatory de-escalation training sessions, their expressions a mix of reluctance and curiosity. Community outreach programs sprouted up too, no longer optional but woven into the fabric of their daily duties. The numbers spoke for themselves. Complaints about misconduct had plummeted, a steep drop that felt like a collective sigh of relief. Yet, beneath the surface, the work of mending fractured trust stretched on, a marathon with no finish line in sight. Maya Bennett sat alone in her office one crisp March morning, the faint hum of the precinct filtering through the walls. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the desk where she hunched over the latest performance metrics. The pages rustled under her fingers, each statistic a small victory etched in black ink. Response times had sharpened, incidents involving force had dwindled, and community satisfaction ratings climbed steadily, like a plant reaching for the sun. But Maya wasn't one to let numbers lull her into complacency. She'd seen too many promises unravel, Too many systems buckle under the weight of human flaws. Her dark eyes narrowed as she traced a line on the graph with her fingertip, her mind churning with questions the data couldn't answer. Were people truly feeling safer, or were they just too tired to complain? A soft knock broke her reverie, her assistant. A young woman with a nervous smile and a clipboard perpetually clutched to her chest, poked her head in. "Chief, Lily, and Ethan are here to see you," she said, her voice tentative, as if she feared interrupting something sacred. Maya glanced up, her stern features softening for a moment. "Send them in," she replied, pushing the reports aside with a deliberate sweep of her hand. The papers settled into a neat stack, a temporary truce in her ongoing battle with doubt. Lily Martinez and Ethan Wells stepped into the room, their boots clicking against the linoleum floor. Both carried themselves with a quiet confidence, but their eyes betrayed the exhaustion of their relentless efforts. They were more than officers to Maya now, they were pillars, steady and unyielding, in a precinct still finding its footing. Lily's sharp jaw was set, her posture rigid with determination, while Ethan's easy smile masked a weariness that tugged at the corners of his mouth. They'd earned Maya's trust not just through their tireless work, but because they lived the values she'd fought to instill: accountability, transparency, a refusal to look away from hard truths. "We've got an update for you," Ethan began, his voice steady as he leaned against the edge of a chair. "The community forums are picking up steam. Attendance has doubled in the last few months, and people are actually talking, giving us feedback we can use." His hands gestured animatedly, as if he could still feel the energy of those crowded rooms. Lily nodded, her dark ponytail swaying slightly. "They're starting to believe in us again, Chief," she added, her tone measured but laced with a flicker of hope. "It's slow, like watching paint dry, but it's real." Maya leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking under her weight. A faint smile tugged at her lips, though her eyes remained sharp, searching their faces for any hint of overconfidence. "That's good to hear," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "But don't get comfortable. Trust is a fragile thing. It takes years to nurture, and a single misstep to shatter. We've got to keep proving ourselves day in and day out." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her own resolve. She'd seen what happened when power was wielded carelessly, how it corroded everything it touched. Justice, she believed, wasn't just about punishment, it was about consistency, about showing up even when no one was watching. Lily straightened, her expression resolute. "Understood," she said simply, her tone a quiet vow. Ethan hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck as if wrestling with a thought. "There's something else," he ventured, his brow furrowing. "We've been talking to some of the newer recruits. They're watching us, looking for cues. I think they're trying to figure out if they're on the right path." His voice softened, tinged with a mix of pride and uncertainty. Maya's smile widened just a fraction, a rare glimmer of warmth breaking through her guarded demeanor. "That's leadership, Officer Wells," she said, her gaze locking with his. "You and Lily have stepped up in ways I couldn't have demanded. Keep pushing. They need you more than they'll admit." Later that day, Maya slipped into the back of a community forum, her presence unannounced and understated. The meeting unfolded in a local library, its small room packed with residents perched on folding chairs. The air smelled faintly of old books and coffee, the walls lined with faded posters touting literacy and hope. People fidgeted, their faces a mosaic of skepticism and cautious optimism. As they waited for a chance to speak, a man in his late 40s rose to his feet, his weathered hands clasped tightly in front of him. His eyes darted nervously before settling on Maya. "I'll be honest," he said, his voice rough but earnest, "when all this oversight stuff started, I figured it was just smoke and mirrors, another empty promise, but I've noticed a change. Officers stop and talk now. They listen." A murmur rippled through the crowd, heads nodding in reluctant agreement. Maya's chest tightened with a quiet surge of pride, though she kept her expression neutral. A woman near the front, her hair streaked with gray, raised a trembling hand. "But what happens when you're gone?" she asked, her voice sharp with doubt. "How do we know this won't all fall apart?" The question sliced through the room, raw and unfiltered. Maya stepped forward, her boots echoing softly against the hardwood floor. She met the woman's gaze, unflinching. "That's a fair worry," she said. her tone calm but laced with steel. Change can't hinge on one person or one fleeting moment. That's why we're building something bigger: policies, systems, structures that stand on their own. My job isn't to be the glue holding this together. It's to make sure this precinct serves you long after I've left." Her words landed with a quiet force, met by hesitant applause that grew steadier as it spread. She meant every syllable. Justice wasn't a gift bestowed by a single hero, it was a foundation, painstakingly laid, brick by brick. Meanwhile, Victor Hayes was carving out a new path, one he hadn't foreseen in his darkest days. The mentorship program he'd joined had become his anchor, pulling him from the depths of regret into something resembling purpose. He stood in a cramped community center one afternoon, surrounded by 6 teenage boys sprawled across mismatched chairs. Their ages ranged from 13 to 17, their faces a gallery of defiance and curiosity. Victor adjusted his stance, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as he met their gazes. "Let me ask you something," he said, his gravelly voice cutting through the hum of a flickering fluorescent light. "When you're stuck in a tough spot, what's the first thing that pops into your head how to get out of it?" One boy, a lanky 13-year-old with a mop of curls, shrugged. "Yeah, getting out," he muttered, kicking at the leg of his chair. Victor nodded, his weathered face creasing with a faint smile. "That's human," he said. "But here's the kicker: it's not just about escaping the moment. You've got to think about what comes next. Every choice you make ripples out, touches you, the people around you, maybe even folks you'll never meet." I learned that the hard way. His eyes darkened, memories of his time behind a badge flashing like storm clouds across his mind. Jalen, a tall 16-year-old with a guarded stare, tilted his head. "You mean back when you were a cop?" he asked, his tone probing, but not hostile. Victor didn't flinch, though the question stung like salt in an old wound. "Exactly," he said, his voice steady. "I thought that badge gave me a free pass to do whatever I wanted. I hurt people, good people, because I didn't stop to think. I abused the power I had. And it didn't just ruin them, it ate me alive too. If I'd looked at the bigger picture, I might have been a better man." Jalen's eyes softened, his skepticism giving way to something thoughtful as he leaned back in his chair. Victor felt a flicker of connection, a fragile bridge between his past and their futures. That evening, Maya's phone lit up with a text from Victor as she sat at her desk, the precinct quieting around her. "Thanks for pointing me in the right direction," it read. "I'm still figuring it out, but I think I'm finally doing some good." She stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the screen. Redemption wasn't a straight line. She knew Victor's journey was proof of that. "Keep at it." She typed back, her lips curving faintly. "Change takes time." His message lingered in her mind, a reminder that accountability could heal as much as it could punish. Back at the precinct, the culture was shifting, a slow tectonic grind. Ethan and Lily had become guiding lights for the newer recruits, their voices steady amid the uncertainty of a department still shedding its old skin. One evening, Ethan lingered in the break room, the scent of burnt coffee thick in the air. Sergeant Harper, a grizzled veteran with a permanent scowl, sat nursing a mug across from him. Harper had been a loud skeptic of the reforms, his grumbling a constant undercurrent in the early days. "You've been quiet lately, Sergeant," Ethan said, his tone light but edged with curiosity as he poured himself a cup. Harper shrugged, his broad shoulders slumping slightly. "Been rethinking some things," he muttered, staring into his coffee as if it held answers. Ethan raised an eyebrow, leaning against the counter. "Oh," Harper sighed, his grizzled features softening for a moment. "I wasn't sold on all this at first. Felt like we were getting slapped for one guy's screw-up. But maybe there's something to it. Things feel better now, lighter, even." Ethan's smile was small but genuine. "Never too late to shift gears, Sergeant," he said, clapping Harper on the shoulder. The older man grunted, but a flicker of agreement passed between theme and unspoken truce. The precinct's transformation wasn't seamless. Pockets of resistance still smoldered, old habits clinging like damp rot. The community's trust, though growing, remained brittle, ready to crack under the wrong pressure. But Maya and her team pressed forward, undeterred. One evening, as she prepared to leave her office, she paused by the window. gazing out at the city's restless streets bathed in the glow of sodium lights. Her phone buzzed again. Meeting with the recruits went well. The message read, "They're hungry to learn." This might actually stick. Maya's lips curved into a cautious smile, a rare moment of lightness piercing her resolve. The road ahead loomed long and treacherous, but the precinct had turned a corner. Officers were holding each other to account. The community was beginning to lean in, and the seeds of change were taking hold, fragile but stubborn. She slipped on her coat, the weight of her badge a familiar comfort against her chest. This wasn't just about one precinct. She thought it was about proving that systems could bend toward justice, that power didn't have to corrupt if it was tempered by consequence. Ethan and Lily were shaping the future. Victor was clawing his way back from the abyss. And even skeptics like Harper were starting to see the light. Change wasn't a finish line. It was a journey, jagged and uncertain. But as the city pulsed beyond her window, Maya felt a quiet pride. They were walking the path together, officers, residents, even the ghosts of past mistakes, and it was a road worth traveling. Elsewhere, Marcus Chen gripped the steering wheel of his black Toyota Camry, his knuckles pale against the dark leather. The clock glowed 11:45 p.m. The dashboard's digital numbers a harsh reminder of the endless budget meeting he'd just escaped. Snowflakes drifted lazily onto the windshield, melting into tiny beads as the heater hummed against the biting OF chill. Downtown Baltimore stretched out before him, its empty streets a silent canvas of shadows and streetlights. Exhaustion weighed on him, his eyes burning from 5 hours of heated debate as the Finance Committee chairman. The police department's push for military-grade gear had sparked the fiercest clash. Marcus had dug in his heels, arguing that funds should flow to training and community programs instead. His voice had trembled with conviction, but now, alone in the quiet, he just wanted home. Sarah would have left dinner in the microwave, as she always did when he worked late. He could almost taste the warmth of it, feel the give of his armchair beneath him. His house was a mere 15 minutes away, a beacon in the cold night. Then, a flash of red and blue pierced the darkness behind him. His heart jolted, his gaze flicking to the rearview mirror. The speedometer needle sat steady at the limit hadn't slipped. Confusion prickled at him, but he steadied his breath, signaling as he eased the car to the curb beneath the streetlight's pale glow. His father's voice echoed in his mind, a former cop's advice: stay visible, stay calm. Marcus waited, the snow falling thicker now, as the weight of the night settled deeper into his bones. The night was cloaked in a bitter chill, the kind that seeps into your bones and refuses to let go. Marcus Chen sat in his car, the engine humming softly, a fragile bubble of warmth against the icy grip of the winter evening. He'd been driving home after a long day at City Hall, his mind still buzzing with the weight of council decisions, when the flashing lights of a patrol car pierced the darkness behind him. His stomach tightened not out of fear, but from a weary familiarity. In his 15 years of public service, he'd heard the stories, the whispered complaints, the late-night calls from constituents about moments just like this. Now, it seemed, it was his turn to live one. 2 officers emerged from the patrol car, their silhouettes stark against the swirling snowflakes caught in the glow of their headlights. They approached with purpose, one on each side of Marcus's vehicle, their heavy boots crunching through the thin layer of snow that dusted the asphalt. Flashlights blazed through his windows, beams slicing through the night and flooding the interior with harsh, unrelenting light. Marcus squinted, the glare blinding him to their faces, turning them into faceless shadows of authority. Before he could fully lower his driver's side window, a sharp rap of knuckles against the glass jolted him a demand, not a request. The window slid down with a faint whine, and the cold rushed in, biting at his cheeks. "License and registration," the officer barked, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. No greeting, no softening of tone, just raw, unfiltered command. Marcus caught the glint of a nameplate in the flashlight's glow. "R. Brady." The officer's words carried a weight Marcus knew all too well, a blend of entitlement and aggression that he'd encountered too often in his career. It was the sound of power flexing its muscles, unapologetic and unrestrained. "Good evening, officer," Marcus replied, his voice steady and polite despite the unease curling in his chest. He moved slowly, deliberately, reaching for his wallet in the center console. Every motion was calculated, knew the stakes, knew how quickly a simple gesture could be misread. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" On the passenger side, the second officer shifted his stance. His nameplate read Reed Thompson, and Marcus didn't miss the subtle flex of his hand as it settled on the holster at his hip. It was a quiet threat, a wordless warning that hung heavy in the air. Marcus's pulse quickened, but he kept his face calm, his breathing even. He'd spent years training himself to navigate tense moments, to hold his ground without escalating them. But this felt different, personal. "Your right taillight's out," Brady said, his tone flat, almost bored. The words landed like a slap, and Marcus frowned inwardly. He knew it was a lie. Just last week, he'd had his car service, every light checked, every detail inspected. It was pristine, a point of quiet pride for a man who valued order in his life. But he didn't argue, not yet. Instead, he met Brady's gazier, what he could see of it behind the blinding flashlight, and kept his voice level. "I apologize, officer, but I believe there might be some mistake. I had my car checked recently, and all the lights were functioning perfectly." The air seemed to grow colder, sharper, as if the night itself bristled at his words. Brady straightened, his chest puffing out in a deliberate show of dominance, his shadow looming larger against the snow-dusted pavement. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," he ordered, his voice dropping into a deeper, more menacing register. Marcus felt his heart thud against his ribs, a steady drumbeat of adrenaline. He glanced at the dashboard. 20 degrees outside, the wind howling softly through the empty street. "Officer, it's freezing out there, and I don't see any reason." "I said step out of the vehicle." Brady's shout shattered the quiet, echoing off the brick facades of the nearby buildings. Lights flickered on in a few windows, curious eyes peering down at the unfolding drama. Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. He knew his rights years on the city council had drilled them into him. But he also knew the unspoken truth. Rights didn't always matter in moments like this. Not when power held the reins unchecked. With a slow, measured breath, he unbuckled his seatbelt, the click sounding unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He pushed the door open, and the frigid air hit him like a wall, stealing the breath from his lungs. His suit jacket, tailored and expensive, offered little defense against the biting wind. Snowflakes danced around him, settling on his broad shoulders and clinging to the fabric of his navy suit. His polished leather shoes sank into the thin layer of snow, the cold seeping through the soles and numbing his toes almost instantly. He stepped onto the pavement, the crunch of ice beneath his feet a stark reminder of how vulnerable he was out here. "Hands where we can see them," Thompson snapped, his flashlight beam tracking Marcus's every move like a predator stalking prey. Marcus raised his hands slightly, palms open, his posture rigid but dignified. He noticed something that sent a shiver down his spine unrelated to the cold. Both officers' body cameras were off, their lenses dark and lifeless. It was a violation of protocol, a glaring red flag that whispered of intent. Marcus's stomach churned. This wasn't just a routine stop anymore. Brady began to circle him, his boots leaving deep imprints in the snow, his movements slow and deliberate, like a shark sizing up its next meal. The streetlight overhead cast jagged shadows across the ground, stretching and twisting with every step. Up above, more lights blinked on, and Marcus caught the faint glint of phone screens glowing behind curtains. People were watching, recordingslent witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. "So, you think you know more than a police officer?" Brady's voice dripped with mockery, his breath puffing into clouds that lingered in the icy air. He stopped in front of Marcus, too close, his face inches away. Marcus could smell the stale coffee on his breath, could see the faint stubble on his jaw glinting in the light. "You wanna argue about your taillight?" Marcus stood still, his suit collecting snowflakes like a canvas of white. The wind whipped harder now, stinging his exposed skin, his fingers growing stiff and numb. He kept his hands visible, his voice calm despite the tremor threatening to break through. "No, sir. I simply wanted to point out that there might be a misunderstanding." Thompson, younger and leaner, kept his flashlight trained on Marcus while peering into the car's interior. "Hey, Brady," he called, his tone shifting to something almost gleeful. This guy's got some fancy stuff in here. Custom leather seats, high-end laptop in the back. Oh, really? Brady's voice turned syrupy with fake curiosity. He leaned in closer, his bulk invading Marcus's space. So you're one of those rich guys who think they're above the law, huh? A passing car slowed, its driver craning to see, but sped off when Brady shot a glare its way. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing the street, and Marcus's dress shoes were no match for it. His feet ached, frozen and heavy, but he held his ground. I assure you, Officer Brady, I have complete respect for the law, Marcus said, his composure unshaken. He considered pulling out his city council ID, letting the truth of who he was shift the dynamic. But he stopped himself. He wanted to feel this raw, unfiltered experience so many others had described to him in hushed, angry tones. He needed to know. Prove it, then, Brady sneered, a smirk twisting his lips. Since you're so respectful, drop and give me 20 push-ups, right here, right now. Marcus blinked, the absurdity of the demand crashing over him like a wave. Excuse me? You heard me, Brady said, his hand resting casually on his taser, a glint of menace in his eyes. 20 push-ups, consider it a lesson in humility. Unless you'd rather we search your vehicle for anything illegal. Thompson chuckled, already pulling out his personal phone, the screen glowing as he angled it to record. Marcus stared at the pavement, frozen, littered with slush and gravel. Then he looked at the officers, memorizing their badge numbers, etching them into his mind. The ground is frozen, he said quietly, and this is hardly standard procedure. Brady stepped closer, his boots crunching ominously. Oh, now you're an expert on police procedure? Make it 30 push-ups, and every time you complain, I'll add 10 more. Marcus glanced at his car, the exhaust curling into the air, a fleeting reminder of the warmth he'd left behind. More lights glowed in the buildings around them, more phones capturing the scene. The officers didn't seem to career, perhaps they didn't notice. Slowly, Marcus lowered himself to the ground, the cold biting into his knees as the wet snow soaked through his suit pants. He placed his hands on the pavement, the icy sting shooting through his palms, his wedding ring clinking against the concrete. Count them out loud, Brady ordered, his voice thick with satisfaction. And make improper push-ups, no half measures. Marcus began, his voice steady despite the humiliation clawing at his chest. 1 to 3 each dip brought his tie dragging through the slush, his pristine Suthors earlier a symbol of his authority ruined beyond repair. Thompson circled him, phone in hand, narrating for his invisible audience. This is what happens when people don't respect authority. He laughed, his voice boyish and cruel. Marcus's arms trembled, not just from the effort, but from the cold seeping into his bones. His breath came in sharp bursts, visible in the frigid air. He kept counting, his mind a storm of thoughts, anger, resolve, and a quiet vow that this wouldn't end here. At 28, his wallet slipped from his breast pocket, unnoticed by the officers in their glee. It hit the pavement with a soft thud, flipping open as he pushed through the final reps. 29:30. He stopped, his chest heaving, his suit soaked and streaked with grime. Small pebbles had dug into his palms, leaving red welts. Brady strutted around him, boots splashing dirty snow near Marcus's face. Not bad for a fancy boy, he taunted, while Thompson snickered, still filming. Then Thompson's flashlight caught something, a glint of gold against the wet pavement. Brady, he said, his voice losing its edge. He lowered his phone, stepping closer to the fallen wallet. You might want to see this. Brady froze mid-stride, his smirk fading as he followed Thompson's gaze. The wallet lay open, the city council seal gleaming under the streetlight. Marcus Chen, city council member, chairman of the police oversight committee. The air shifted, heavy with the weight of realization. Brady's face drained of color, his bravado crumbling like the snow underfoot. He bent down quickly, snatching the wallet as if he could undo what had been seen. Marcus rose slowly, brushing the snow from his ruined suit, his eyes locking with Brady's. The officer's arrogance had built a house of cards, and now the wind of consequence was blowing. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore, it was about every citizen who'd faced this abuse. Every story he'd heard and promised to address. Justice, he thought, was a slow fire, but it burned bright, And tonight, it had found its spark. Tomorrow, the flames would rise, and the department would feel the heat. For now, though, Marcus stood tall in the freezing night, a man who'd endured and who'd never forget. The icy wind sliced through the night, carrying with it a flurry of snow that stung Marcus Chen's face as he struggled to push himself up from the frozen pavement. His palms pressed hard against the rough, unforgiving surface, the cold seeping through his skin and into his bones. "Sir, I am so sorry," stammered Officer Thompson, his voice trembling with a mix of panic and regret as he bent down, arms outstretched to assist. "We had no idea who you were, please. Let me help you." But Marcus ignored the outstretched hands, his pride and anger fueling him as he rose slowly, his stiff legs protesting with every movement. The damp patches on his knees and elbows darkened his once pristine suit, the fabric torn and small, jagged rips from the abrasive concrete. His tie, now a soggy mess, dripped with filthy slush, each drop falling to the ground like a silent accusation. With deliberate calm, he bent down to retrieve his wallet, brushing off the clinging snow as though it were the last shred of his dignity he could salvage. Officer Thompson stood a few feet away, his youthful face pale under the dim glow of the streetlight, fumbling with his phone in a frantic attempt to erase the incriminating video he'd recorded. Marcus's voice cut through the silence, low and steady, but laced with an edge sharp enough to halt the young cop mid-motion. "I wouldn't delete that if I were you, Officer Thompson. Destroying evidence is a serious offense, you know that." Thompson's hand froze above the screen, his wide eyes darting between his phone and Marcus, as if caught in a trap he hadn't realized he'd set for himself. Beside him, Officer Brady shifted uncomfortably, his broad shoulders hunching against the falling snow, his breath puffing out in quick, nervous clouds. The air around them thickened with tension, the power dynamic flipping so swiftly it left both officers reeling. Marcus brushed at his ruined suit with slow, methodical strokes, the snowflakes swirling around him like witnesses to his quiet fury. The night, once routine, now pulsed with the weight of consequence. "Sir, please understand," Brady began, his voice cracking as it rose into something close to a plea. He stepped forward, his boots crunching the snow, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "This was just a routine traffic stop. It got a little out of hand, that's all. We meant no disrespect." Marcus turned to face him, his movements deliberate, his expression a mask of calm that barely concealed the storm brewing in his dark, intense eyes. "A routine traffic stop," he echoed, his tone icy and precise. "For a taillight that isn't even broken?" With both of your body cameras conveniently switched off, the officers exchanged a fleeting, nervous glance, their faces tightening as the reality of their situation sank in. Beyond them, in the shadowed windows of the nearby apartment buildings, Marcus caught the faint glint of phone screens residents capturing every second of this unraveling scene. He could already imagine the footage spreading like wildfire across social media, the hashtags and comments piling up by morning. Thompson, desperate to regain some footing, took a hesitant step forward, his voice softer now, almost conciliatory. "Mr. Chen, sir, we can explain everything. Maybe we could talk this over somewhere warmer. There's a coffee shop just around the corner." Marcus's gaze shifted to him, and the chill in his response outmatched the biting winter air. "No, thank you, Officer Thompson. I think we've had quite enough conversation for one night." With that, he turned and walked back to his car, his dress shoes squelching with each step, leaving a trail of wet footprints in the snow like a map of his humiliation. Before sliding into the driver's seat, he paused and faced the officers one final time, his silhouette stark against the headlights. "Officers Brady and Thompson," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority they'd failed to recognize earlier. "I suggest you both prepare detailed reports about this incident. Include everything where you really pulled me over, why your body cameras were off, and why you thought it was appropriate to force a citizen to do push-ups in freezing weather during a traffic stop." The officers stood rigid, their postures stiff as statues under the streetlight's harsh glow, the snow settling on their uniforms like a shroud. Brady's mouth opened, a weak protest forming, but Marcus silenced him with a raised hand. "Submit those reports to my office by 9 a.m. tomorrow," he continued, his tone unyielding. "And Officer Thompson, I expect the complete, undeleted video from your phone to be included. Good night, gentlemen." He slipped into his car, the door closing with a soft thud that echoed in the stillness. As the engine hummed to life, the heater blasted warm air against his sodden clothes. But it did little to thaw the chill that had settled deep within him. In the rearview mirror, he watched the two officers linger in the snow, their figures shrinking as he pulled away men who had no idea that their petty abuse of power was about to ignite the most significant police reform their city had ever witnessed. The dashboard clock glowed 12:30 a.m. as Marcus navigated the deserted streets. The memories of the past are replaying in his mind with relentless clarity. He could still hear Brady's mocking laughter, sharp and cruel, cutting through the night. He felt the sting of the frozen pavement against his hands, the way his tie had dragged through the slush, soaking up the grime of the street. His phone buzzed insistently on the passenger seat, likely Sarah, his wife, wondering why he hadn't come home yet. But how could he pick up? How could he find the words to tell her that her husband, a respected city council member, had been reduced to a spectacle, forced to perform push-ups in the snow like some grunt at basic training? At a red light, he caught his reflection in the mirror's usually impeccable black hair plastered wet and wild against his forehead, his 45-year-old face etched with lines of exhaustion that made him look a decade older. Gravel clung stubbornly to his sleeves, and a dark stain bloomed across his chest where the snow had melted into his shirt. "Marcus Chen," he muttered to himself, a bitter edge to his voice. "You just had to feel it for yourself, didn't you?" For years, he'd sat through endless community meetings, listening to residents recount tales of police overreachment, intimidation, abuses of power. He'd nodded sympathetically, scribbled notes, promised investigations. But until this night, those stories had been abstract, distant. Now, the helplessness they'd described was his own, a raw, visceral ache that gnawed at him. His phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert. Someone had already uploaded the video online. He tapped the screen and watched a few shaky seconds, his body lowering to the ground. The officer's laughter ringing out, the snow falling mercilessly around him. The view count ticked upward with alarming speed. By the time he turned onto his quiet street, the initial shock had begun to fade, replaced by a steely resolve. In his 15 years on the city council, he'd never been more certain of what had to be done. He pulled into his driveway but didn't get out right away. Instead, he reached for his briefcase, pulling out his tablet with hands that no longer trembled. Opening his email, he typed with swift, decisive strokes, "Emergency meeting notice, Police Oversight Committee. Time, 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. Location, Main Council Chamber. Agenda, review of recent police conduct and departmental policies. Attendance, mandatory." After hitting send, he dialed his assistant, Mary, who picked up despite the late hour, her voice groggy but alert. "Mary, I need every complaint filed against Officers Brady and Thompson from the last 5 years on my desk by 8 a.m., he said, his tone clipped. "And get me the police department's body camera compliance reports for the past 6 months. Mary, ever unflappable even at this hour, didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." "Anything else?" Marcus glanced out at the snow still drifting down in his driveway. "Yes. Contact IT. I want all footage from the traffic cameras at Pine and 5th Street between 11:45 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. tonight. And Mary, thank you." His final call was to the one person who'd grasped the gravity of this moment, his father, James Chen, a retired police captain whose 70 years hadn't dulled his sharp mind. The phone rang 3 times before his father's voice came through, steady and familiar. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "Remember all those times you warned me about how power can corrupt even good officers? I just lived it." As he recounted the night's events, his father listened in silence, the weight of his son's words settling between them. When Marcus finished, James paused, then spoke with quiet conviction. "Son, sometimes the worst experiences are the best fuel for change. What are you going to do about it?" Marcus glanced at his ruined suit, then at his council badge gleaming faintly on the passenger seat. "I'm going to do what should have been done years ago, Dad. Tomorrow, we start cleaning house." Stepping out of the car, Marcus trudged toward his front door, the snow crunching underfoot. The house was dark, save for the porch light Sarah always left burning for him, a small beacon of warmth in the night. Tomorrow, he'd unleash a reckoning on the police department, but tonight, he needed his wife's embrace, a hot shower, and time to steel himself for the fight ahead. The wet footprints he left on the porch would dry by dawn, but the ripples of this night would stretch far beyond. At precisely 7 a.m., Marcus strode into City Hall, a transformed man. Gone was the shivering figure from the snow. In his place stood a councilman in his sharpest black suit, a bold red tie knotted with purpose, a thick folder tucked under his arm. The security guard at the entrance blinked in surprise. Marcus was never this early. At her desk, Mary greeted him with tired eyes ringed by dark circles, evidence of a sleepless night spent fulfilling his requests. 5 neat stacks of papers sat before her, alongside a steaming coffee cup. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," she said, rising. "I have everything you asked for. Officers Brady and Thompson have racked up 17 complaints in the past 5 years. None properly investigated." She handed him the first stack, and Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "And the body camera reports." Mary lifted another stack. "Interesting pattern. Both officers reported their cameras malfunctioning 12 times in the last 6 months, 4 times the department average." As the office buzzed to life with arriving staff, curious glances followed Marcus. The video had exploded overnight, surpassing 100,000 views, and local news stations were looping it on their morning broadcasts. His phone vibrated, incessant lists, calls from the police chief to from the mayor. Countless pleas from reporters. Marcus ignored them all. In his office, he spread the documents across his desk, each page a testament to a system rotten with unchecked power. Justice, he thought, wasn't just about punishment, it was about dismantling the structures that let men like Brady and Thompson thrive. The lesson of this night wasn't his humiliation, it was the clarity it brought. Power abused would always demand a reckoning, and today, Marcus would ensure it came. At precisely 8:45 a.m., the sun streamed through the tall windows of Marcus Chen's office, casting long, golden streaks across the hardwood floor. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and yesterday's coffee, a quiet haven amidst the storm brewing outside. Officers Brady and Thompson stepped inside, their boots squeaking faintly against the polished surface. In the stark daylight, they looked different, smaller, somehow, as if the morning sun had stripped away the menacing shadows they'd carried the night before. Brady, usually a towering figure of unshakable confidence, stood with his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides, his fingers twisting the hem of his jacket. Thompson, younger and wearier, kept his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to muster the courage to meet Marcus's steady, piercing eyes. "Your reports," Marcus said simply, his voice low but commanding, extending a hand with deliberate calm. The officers hesitated, exchanging a fleeting glance before fumbling to hand over the crumpled paperwork. Their hands trembled slightly as the pages passed into Marcus's gripsack, a stark contrast to the bold, swaggering authority they'd wielded just hours ago under the cold, unforgiving night sky. "Sir," Brady began, his voice cracking with uncertainty. "About last night," Marcus silenced him with a single raised hand, the gesture sharp and final. "Save it for the committee meeting. It's in 45 minutes. I suggest you both go prepare." His tone was ice, leaving no room for argument. The officers shuffled out, heads bowed, their footsteps echoing faintly in the hallway as they retreated. Alone now, Marcus sank into his chair, the leather creaking beneath him as he unfolded the reports. The words blurred briefly before his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from the simmering anger he felt rising in his chest. As he'd expected, Brady's account painted a flimsy picture, a standard field sobriety test. He'd written, as if that justified the absurdity of what had transpired. Thompson's version was even more brazen, claiming Marcus had volunteered to perform exercises in the snow, a lie so bold it almost made Marcus laugh, though the sound caught in his throat, bitter and hollow. He set the papers down, his fingers tracing the edges as he stared out the window, the city waking up beyond the glass. Last night replayed in his mind, the biting wind, the snow soaking through his clothes, The mocking laughter of the two men who'd thought their badges made them untouchable. Justice, he thought, wasn't just a word, it was a reckoning, and it was coming. By 9:25 a.m., Marcus strode into the main council chamber, his footsteps steady against the polished marble floor. The room buzzed with restless energy, packed to the brim with committee members in their stiff suits, citizens craning their necks for a better view, and local news crews lining the back wall, their cameras humming softly like insects. The air was thick with tension, heavy as the snow that had blanketed the city the night before. Police Chief Williams sat in the front row, his broad shoulders hunched, his face flushed a deep crimson anger, embarrassment, or perhaps both warring beneath his weathered skin. Nearby, Officers Brady and Thompson sat stiffly in their full-dress uniforms, the brass buttons gleaming under the fluorescent lights, but the polish couldn't hide their discomfort. Traddy's jaw clenched tight, Thompson's hands twisting nervously in his lap. Marcus took his place at the center of the committee table, his movements deliberate as he arranged the evidence before him, the officers' falsified reports, the body camera records that mysteriously hadn't been activated, the traffic camera footage capturing every damning moment from the previous night, and a stack of civilian complaints that had been buried too long. He leaned into the microphone, his voice steady and resonant, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "Before we begin, I want to thank Officers Brady and Thompson." The room fell into a stunned, bewildered silence. Heads turned, eyes widened. The two officers glanced up, their faces flickering with confusion, a fleeting hope that perhaps they'd misjudged the situation. Marcus let the pause linger, then continued, his tone hardening. "Last night, these officers showed us exactly why we need major police reform in this city. They didn't know I was a council member. They thought I was just another citizen they could trample underfoot. And that's the heart of the problem." With a press of a button, the large screen behind him flickered to life, bathing the room in the cold, clinical light of the traffic camera footage. The images were undeniable. Marcus's car gliding smoothly down the snowy street. No swerving, no speeding, no broken taillight, just a man driving home, targeted for no reason but the whims of two men drunk on their own power. The room watched, breathless, as the scene unfolded from multiple angles, Brady barking orders, Thompson snickering as Marcus dropped to the snow for push-ups, their laughter cutting through the night like a blade. Marcus's voice grew stronger, each word a hammer strike. "Today, we're not just addressing to officers who abuse their authority. We're confronting every officer who thinks a badge grants them permission to degrade, to intimidate, to lie. We're digging into every ignored complaint, every malfunctioning body camera, every falsified report, and we're starting with last night." The silence in the chamber was suffocating. Every eye locked on Marcus as he held the room in his grip. Brady and Thompson shrank in their seats, their earlier bravado evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Chief Williams sat rigid, his fists clenched, his authority crumbling with every passing second. Marcus picked up the first file, his movements slow and deliberate, the rustle of paper loud in the stillness. "Let's start with Officer Brady's report," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. "According to this, you pulled me over for a routine traffic stop and suspected I was intoxicated. Is that correct, Officer Brady?" Brady shifted, his uniform suddenly too tight, the collar digging into his reddening neck. "Yes, sir," he mumbled, barely audible. "That was my professional judgment at the time." Marcus nodded, a faint, humorless smile tugging at his lips. He pressed another button, and the screen flared again with footage. Marcus's car, steady and lawful, rolling through the night. "Interesting," Marcus said, his tone dry as dust. "Because the traffic camera shows I was driving perfectly. No swerving, no speeding, no violation. Would you like to revise your statement?" Before Brady could stammer a response, Marcus turned to Thompson, pulling out another document. "And Officer Thompson, your report states I volunteered to do exercises in the snow. Is that your official story?" Thompson's face drained of color, his youthful features crumpling under the weight of the room's scrutiny. He glanced at Chief Williams, whose red face offered no salvation, then back at Marcus. "To may have misremembered some details," he whispered, his voice trembling. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a wave of disbelief and outrage. Marcus didn't relent. He played a bystander's video next, the grainy footage filling the chamber with the sound of Brady's barked commands, and Thompson's cruel laughter as Marcus struggled in the snow. "Misremembered," Marcus repeated, his voice soft but searing. "Like you misremembered to turn on your body cameras? Like you misremembered proper procedure?" At that moment, Mary, Marcus's sharp-eyed assistant, slipped into the room, her heels clicking softly as she handed him another file. He opened it with a flourish, addressing the entire chamber now. "In the past 5 years, these 2 officers have racked up 17 civilian complaints. Want to know how many were properly investigated? 0. Chief Williams surged to his feet, his face now a violent shade of purple. "Mr. Chen, with all due respect, this feels like a personal vendetta over one unfortunate incident." Marcus cut him off, his voice still calm but edged with steel. "One incident? Let's ask the room." He turned to the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. "How many of you have experienced similar treatment from our police?" Slowly, hesitantly. Hands began to raise, a few at first, then more, until nearly half the room stood marked by their upraised arms. The news cameras swiveled, capturing every trembling hand, every silent story of humiliation and fear. Marcus pulled out another document, holding it aloft like a banner. "This is a proposal for immediate police reform. Mandatory body cameras with strict penalties for non-compliance, civilian oversight for all complaints, and immediate suspension for any officer caught abusing their power." Brady and Thompson slumped lower, their polished uniforms no shield against the tide turning against them. Chief Williams stared at his shoes, his earlier bluster extinguished. "Officers Brady and Thompson," Marcus said, his voice ringing out, "you have 2 choices. Resign now, or we continue this investigation. Every complaint, every stop, every lie you've ever filed." The room held its breath. Brady, who'd loomed so large in the snow last night, now looked diminished, a shadow of himself. "We'll resign," he muttered, his voice barely reaching the microphone. Thompson nodded, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool air. Marcus turned to Chief Williams. "Chief, your department needs a reckoning. You can lead it, or we'll find someone who will." The chief gave a stiff, reluctant nod, his career teetering on the edge. Marcus lifted the reform proposal. "Committee members, it's time to vote. Last night showed us what festers in our city under the cover of darkness. Today, we drag it into the light." One by one, hands rose in support, the vote unanimous. As Marcus gathered his papers, his eyes caught his father's in the back of the room, an old police captain, weathered and quiet, offering a small, proud nod. Sometimes justice needed a push, Marcus thought, or in this case, 30 push-ups in the snow. By late afternoon, the city buzzed with the news. Brady and Thompson's resignations spread like wildfire, every TV station replaying clips of the meeting alongside the viral video of Marcus in the snow. He sat in his office, the small TV flickering with coverage as he sifted through hundreds of email stories of harassment, messages of gratitude, calls for more change. Mary appeared at the door. "Mr. Chen, the mayor's here." Mayor Roberts stepped in, his usual swagger replaced by a cautious tread, his tie loosened as if he'd already lost a battle. "Marcus, we need to talk about today." Marcus switched off the TV. "Yes, we do. But first, look at this." He opened his laptop, revealing a spreadsheet, over 300 civilian complaints in the last year, only 8 investigated. The mayor sank into a chair, defeated. "I had no idea it was this bad." Marcus leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Nobody did. Until now." In that moment, the lesson crystallized. Power unchecked breeds corruption, and justice delayed festers into despair. But when the light shines, when voices rise and hands lift, consequences of abuse become a mirror no one can ignore. For Marcus, for the city, it was only the beginning. On a tense afternoon in late winter, Marcus Chen found himself alone in his office, the weight of the day pressing heavily on his shoulders. No one else had dared to peek outside, so he rose from his chair, his steps deliberate as he crossed the room to the window. Peering down, he saw the restless swarm of reporters still camped outside City Hall, their cameras glinting faintly in the fading light. The crowd had thinned since morning, but their persistence was unshakable. a buzzing hive waiting for the next scrap of news. His phone jolted him from his thoughts, vibrating against the desk with another message. It was his father, a retired police captain whose gravelly voice Marcus could almost hear through the text. "The good officers are thanking you. They've been hungry for change for years, all day." The old man's phone had been ringing off the hook, some calls from former colleagues spitting anger, others offering quiet support. Marcus felt a flicker of pride mingled with unease. His father's words were a lifeline, but they also reminded him of the storm he'd stirred. A soft knock broke the stillness, and the door creaked open to reveal Sarah, his wife, stepping inside with a garment bag draped over her arm. Her face was a map of emotion, pride shining in her eyes, worry etched into the faint lines around her mouth. She'd been his anchor through this chaos, unwavering even as the threats and headlines multiplied. "The press conference is in an hour," she said, her voice gentle but firm as she set the suit down on a chair. She reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his, and squeezed it tightly. "You're doing the right thing, Marcus." Her touch lingered, a silent promise that she'd stand by him no matter what came next. He managed a small smile, drawing strength from her certainty, and began to change into the crisp suit, the fabric cool against his skin as he adjusted the tie with trembling hands. Across the room, Mayor Roberts paced like a caged animal, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. His forehead glistened with sweat, and his voice cracked with nerves. "The police union's threatening to push back hard," he said, tugging at his collar. "They're calling this a witch hunt, Marcus." The mayor's eyes darted to him, pleading for reassurance, but Marcus stood tall, unfazed. "Let them," he replied, his tone steady as he smoothed the lapels of his jacket. "We've got evidence, solid proof. We've got witnesses willing to speak. And above all, we've got the truth on our side. It's time for real change, not just promises." His words hung in the air, heavy with conviction, a vow he'd made to himself and the city. Before the mayor could argue, the door flew open again, and Mary, Marcus's sharp-eyed assistant, burst in, her breath quick with excitement. "Two more officers from the East Precinct just resigned," she announced, clutching her phone like a trophy. "Citizens posted videos online, more abuse caught on camera. This thing's spreading like wildfire." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Marcus felt a surge of hope ripple through him. The movement he'd sparked was growing roots, reaching beyond the walls of City Hall into the streets and homes of the people he'd sworn to protect. At precisely 5 p.m., Marcus stepped out onto the broad steps of City Hall, the early evening air sharp against his face. The crowd of reporters surged forward, a sea of flashing lights and outstretched microphones, their shouts blending into a chaotic roar. He squared his shoulders, his heart pounding, but his resolve unbreakable, and began to speak. "Last night," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade, "I felt firsthand what so many of our citizens have endured for years: humiliation, powerlessness. But unlike them, I had the means to act. Today, that changes." He raised a thick stack of papers high above his head, the new police reform bill he'd fought tooth and nail to draft and pass in a matter of days. "This is the start. We're launching a civilian oversight board with real authority. Every complaint will be heard, every officer held accountable, no exceptions." The reporters erupted, their questions tumbling over one another, but Marcus silenced them with a raised hand, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "To the honorable officers who serve this city with integrity, we stand with you. But to those who twist their power into a weapon, your days are done." His eyes caught a figure in the throng, Officer Thompson's wife, her face streaked with quiet tears. A pang of sympathy twisted in his chest. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't signed up for the fallout of her husband's actions. Yet Marcus couldn't forget the countless others' families torn apart, lives shattered by the same abuses of authority he was now dismantling. "Change is hard," he continued, his voice softening but no less firm, "but it's overdue. Starting tomorrow, we're retraining our police for de-escalation skills. Mandatory body cameras checked every day, and community engagement, that's a requirement, not a suggestion." As he finished, a single pair of hands began to clap, the sound tentative at first, then swelling as others joined in. The applause rolled through the crowd, bouncing off the stone walls of City Hall, until it felt like the city itself was cheering. In the back, Marcus spotted his father, standing ramrod straight, his retired captain's pride radiating from him like it had in the old days. The sun dipped low, painting the steps in long, stretching shadows knit the dark veils that had once concealed corruption, but markers of a fading era giving way to something brighter. Tomorrow would bring battle's resistance from the Union, pushback from skeptics, but tonight, standing tall on those steps, Marcus knew the ugliest moments could spark the most beautiful transformations. 6 months later, on a warm summer morning, Marcus stood at a podium in the police academy's graduation hall, the air thick with anticipation. Before him sat 50 new officers, their faces alight with purpose, the first class molded by the reforms he'd poured his soul into. Behind them, rows of families beamed with pride, and among them were two unexpected figures, former officers Brady and Thompson. After their resignations, they hadn't faded into obscurity as Marcus had assumed. 3 months ago, Brady had called him, his voice shaky but earnest, asking to help train recruits by sharing what not to do. Thompson had followed, and now the two sat side by side, their past mistakes reshaped into a raw, honest lesson about the cost of power misused. "Look at the person next to you," Marcus began, his voice warm but commanding. "They're more than your partner, they're your conscience, your witness, a living reminder of what it means to be a good officer." These recruits were different from the classes of years past. There were more women, their determination shining through, more minorities, their presence a quiet defiance of the old guard. Each had spent months serving the community, ladling soup in homeless shelters, mentoring kids at youth centers, sitting with the elderly in quiet homes before they'd ever touched a badge. 6 months ago, he went on, I knelt in the snow, humiliated by officers who'd lost sight of their purpose. Today, I stand here proud to see a new generation who know a badge isn't a tool of fear, it's a pledge of trust. In the front row, Chief Williams nodded, his stern face softened by a rare smile. Once a skeptic, he'd stunned everyone by embracing the changes, firing a dozen officers for misconduct and lifting up those who led with compassion. Mary approached then, her steps brisk as she handed Marcus a sheaf of papers still warm from the printer. He scanned the numbers and grinned, turning back to the crowd. In 6 months, civilian complaints are down 70%. Trust in our police has climbed 65%. Response times are sharper, and both citizens and officers feel safer. Brady shifted in his seat, his expression a tangle of regret and redemption, while his teenage son watched the new officers with wide, admiring eyes. Thompson's wife, whose tears had haunted Marcus at that first press conference, now smiled softly, her hand resting on her husband's shoulder, a fragile piece rebuilt from the wreckage. But the real change, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a reverent hush, isn't in these stats. It's in the stories I don't hear anymore, the ones about fear, shame, and unchecked power. Instead, I hear about officers carrying groceries for the elderly, shooting hoops with kids on street corners, serving their communities with heart. His father sat in the back, his old captain's uniform pristine, a testament to the 40 years he'd given to the force, years he'd now poured into crafting this new training program. Your badge isn't about dominance, Marcus told the recruits. It's not measured by push-ups forced in the snow or fear you can wield. True power lies in the lives you lift, the trust you earn. The ceremony ended with a new tradition. Each officer swore an oath not just to the law, but to the community, vowing respect, dignity, and care. As they received their badges, they were paired with civilian advisors, partners for their first year on the beat. Afterward, Brady approached, his head bowed. "Mr. Chen," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I never apologized properly for that night. What we did, it was wrong. Thank you for making something good out of it." Marcus clasped his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. Sometimes our darkest errors light the way to the brightest change. Outside the academy, Marcus watched as two new officers helped an elderly woman cross the street, her grocery bags swinging lightly in their hands. On another corner, a third showed a gaggle of kids the patrol car's radio, their laughter ringing out. His phone buzzed another city, eager to adopt their reforms, the ripples spreading far beyond their borders. That night, under a sky of summer stars, Marcus drove past the spot where he'd done push-ups in the snow 6 months before. A community police center stood there now, its windows glowing with warmth. Officers and citizens inside not as rulers and ruled, but as allies. 30 push-ups in the cold, he thought, had started something to spark that might just change the world. Justice, he realized, wasn't just punishment, it was accountability woven with hope. A lesson carved from the ashes of power abused.